Heroes of the City of Man. Introduction. Ancient epic. In modern usage, the word epic has come to be a near synonym for big and impressive. Films like Ben-Hur are said to have epic sweep. Bob Costas describes the NBA Finals as an epic battle, and a political speech may be delivered with epic grandeur. In literary studies, epic sometimes takes on this general connotation. Though they do not conform to standard definitions of epic, both Dante's Divine Comedy and Spenser's Faerie Queene are sometimes said to be poems on an epic scale. Frequently, however, the word is used in a more specific sense. Strictly speaking, an epic is a long narrative poem that focuses on a single hero who has national or cosmic significance. Epics recount deeds of great valor and include spiritual beings, gods, goddesses, angels, demons, among their cast of characters. Though Virgil definitely wrote his epic poem, it is commonly believed that the other epics we will examine in the first several chapters originated in performances like that described in Book 8 of the Odyssey. By now they were serving out the portions, mixing wine, and the herald soon approached, leading the faithful bard Demodocus, prized by all the people, seated him in a chair amid the feasters, leaning it against a central column. Stirred now by the muse, the bard launched out in a fine blaze of song, starting at just the point where the main Achaean force, setting their camps afire, had boarded the oar-swept ships and sailed for home. But famed Odysseus's men, already crouched in hiding in the heart of Troy's assembly, dark in that horse, the Trojans dragged themselves to the city heights. This scene illustrates a number of features of ancient epic. Poetry was at that time an oral art, sung or chanted by a bard, and sometimes accompanied by a lyre. Some scholars believe that Homer himself wrote or dictated something like the epics we have today. But even if he did write, he was drawing on a tradition of spoken poetry. Poems were not, however, memorized and repeated verbatim. Rather, they were composed on the spot so that each performance might differ in many details from others. Bards apparently had a mental stock of stories, descriptions, and scenes and could weave them together in countless different ways. The best analogy in the modern world is jazz music, which is usually not written in advance, but improvised as it is performed. Bards were jazz poets. Epic poets use several standard poetic devices. Epics generally are introduced with a proem, in which the poet announces a main character and theme of his story and calls on the muses, goddesses of poetry and speech, to help him do justice to his theme. Most epics, moreover, begin in medias res, in the middle of things. The Iliad does not begin like a fairy tale. Once upon a time there was a man named Achilles. Instead, Achilles rudely burst into the page without waiting to be introduced, already in the middle of the Trojan War and already in the middle of an argument with Agamemnon. If we do not know the characters and setting already, we have to read a ways before we can figure out what is going on. Epic similes are also a characteristic feature of epic poetry. A simile is a comparison of two things, as, for example, my love is like a red, red rose. Literature scholars distinguish the primary and secondary subjects of similes. The primary subject is the thing that the poet is actually talking about, in this case, my love, and the secondary subject is the thing to which the poet is comparing the primary subject, a red, red rose. Epic similes expand the secondary subject of the simile. Thus, this is not an epic simile. My love, who is very beautiful and delicate, and whom I love deeply, is like a red rose. That sentence expands the primary subject. The following is an epic simile, though doubtless a very bad one. My love is like a red, red rose that blooms from a thorned vine upon the garden trestle within which a bee, delighted, seeks for nectar. Similes in ancient epic are often reserved for battle scenes and compare warriors to animals, storms, fires, or sometimes to peacetime activities like hunting and fishing. Comparisons are rarely made in the simple form of Achilles was like a lion. More often they are like this: Achilles was like a lion doing X and Y and Z. The expansion of the secondary subject, the X, Y, and Z, is not arbitrary, but as we shall see, it has a specific connection to the action and themes of the poem. Fixed descriptions, or epithets, are used in epic poetry for characters and things. Achilles is swift or godlike. Hector is breaker of horses. The Greeks are long-haired. The sea is often wine-dark. And dawn is always rosy-fingered. At times, the descriptions are appropriate to the scene. Achilles is swift while chasing Hector around Troy. Yet these epithets may have other layers of meaning. Achilles' entire life passes swiftly, and he is swift to react to Agamemnon's insult. In some instances, an epithet may be used for ironic effect. Achilles is called swift while sitting among his ships, but this highlights the oddness of his situation, a hero who has renounced battle. Similarly, Hector calls his father Priam, who hurls a strong ash spear. But this comes at the end of a speech predicting the fall of Troy, and in any case, Priam is now too old to hurl his spear with any effect. In some instances, the descriptions seem irrelevant to the scene and are used to meet the requirements of poetic meter. Meter in poetry has to do with the rhythm of a poetic line. In English, poetic rhythm is created by standard repeated patterns of stressed and unstressed syllables. Often the pattern is subdued, but in other poems, such as Tennyson's Charge of the Light Brigade, the rhythm comes powerfully to the surface. Below, the stressed syllables are capitalized. Cannon to right of them, cannon to left of them, cannon in front of them, volleyed and thundered. Using emphatic rhythm in this way is appropriate to a poem about the clash and clamor of battle, but would normally be out of place in, for example, a love sonnet. Unless a poet wanted to suggest that love is a battle, which is true enough. In Greek poetry, rhythm is created not by patterns of stressed and unstressed syllables, but by varying the length of a syllable. Here, length literally refers to how long the vowel in each syllable is dragged out in speech. Oo is a long syllable and O is short. Despite this difference in measuring poetic rhythm, the standard patterns of Greek poetry are much as they are in English. Both of Homer's epics are composed in a meter known as dactylic hexameter. The word dactylic comes from the Greek word for finger and is used because the rhythm of a dactyl corresponds to the shape of a human finger. Starting at the hand, follow your index finger to the tip. You'll notice, if you have not before, that it is divided into 3 segments, one longer segment followed by 2 shorter ones. Dactylic meter, therefore, is a rhythm of a long, short, short. Hexameter refers to the number of dactyls per line, 6 in this case. Hex equals 6. Thus, a line of dactylic hexameter can be diagrammed as follows. L equals long, S equals short. LSS, 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 LSS. To get the effect in English, Doug Wilson suggests that you say the word strawberry 6 times, preferably in private. Though dactylic hexameter is a bedrock of Homeric poetry, his lines are in reality more complex. Only 2 complexities can be noted here. First, instead of using dactyls throughout the line, Homer ends each line with 2 long syllables, called a spondee. Thus the line looks like this. LSS, 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 LL. 2 long syllables help to give a sense of completion at the end of each line. Second, there is normally a break in the sense of the line at the midpoint, and often the 2 resulting halves also break in the middle. In the following example, capitalized letters indicate a long syllable and a vertical line indicates a break in sense. Go, if you will, my dear Phoebus, and wash from his wounds the dark blood stain. Here you can see the dactylic pattern and the spondee overlaid by a 4-fold division of the line. I began this digression on poetic meter in the middle of a discussion of Homeric epithets, and it is time to explain why. Standard descriptions of characters do not appeal to us if a modern novelist described one of his characters as blue-eyed every time he appeared. We would begin to think the author lacked imagination. Homer, however, used epithets partly because it helped him compose oral poetry that followed the rhythm of the dactylic hexameter. Epithets differ in meter, and therefore one epithet will fit into a particular slot in the poetic line better than others. For example, Achilles is a short syllable and a spondee, SLL, and thus it can be used at the end of a line that already has nearly 5 dactyls in it, godlike Achilles, is a dactyl and a spondy, LSSLL. And thus it fits at the end of a line that already has 4 dactyls. Swift-footed godlike Achilles scans as SLL, LSSLL. And this meter limits the number of places it will fit. The general point is that epithets enable an oral poet to compose, on the spot, a poem that stays within a fixed rhythmic pattern. On a larger scale, ancient poetry often uses chiastic or concentric patterns. Chiasm, a term taken from the Greek word chi or chai, X, describes a poem, story, or other piece of writing organized by an A-B-B-A structure. In a chiastically arranged text, the first and last section match either by their similarity or contrast, and the middle 2 sections match each other in similar ways. The similarity between matching sections can be of several kinds. Sometimes similar imagery is used, sometimes a descriptive phrase or term is repeated, sometimes the same characters appear. Scripture is full of examples of this pattern. If we follow the Hebrew word order of Psalm 73:3, for example, we find this arrangement. For I envied the arrogant, the prosperity of the wicked I saw. The 2 A sections describe the psalmist's reaction to the wicked, while the B sections describe the wicked. Verse 6 is arranged as follows. Pride is their necklace, like a garment. Violence covers them. Here, the 2 B sections both employ clothing imagery, while the framing A sections describe the moral character of the unrighteous. When chiasms are expanded, they are known as concentric or ring structures. For example, A, B, C, D, C, B, A. Matching sections A, A, B, B, etc. are, as in chiasms, parallel or contrasting, and the central section is often a key turning point, a literary hinge. Gordon Wenham, for example, has shown that the entire flood narrative in Genesis 6-9 is arranged concentrically with Genesis 8:1, and Yahweh remembered Noah at the center. Up to that verse, the waters are rising, everything is being covered, and all living things are dying. After that verse, the waters begin to recede, mountains begin to appear, and new life begins to arise in a new creation. To illustrate the value of recognizing such structures, let me use an extended biblical example, the story of David and Bathsheba, in 2 Samuel 11-12. The story may be outlined as follows. Joab is on the field besieging Rabbah, but David has stayed behind in Jerusalem. David sleeps with Bathsheba, and she becomes pregnant. David arranges for Uriah's death. Bathsheba mourns for Uriah. Nathan confronts David. David mourns for his son. David's son dies. David sleeps with Bathsheba, and she becomes pregnant. David goes to Rabbah and finishes the siege, then returns to Jerusalem. First, this outline clarifies the boundaries of a section of text. If we follow the chapter headings of the Bible, we might be tempted to think that the story ends with chapter 11, verse 27. But in fact, the same story has been broken up into 2 chapters. More likely, we might be tempted to think that chapter 12, 26-31, is part of a wholly different story. But seeing that it corresponds with chapter 11, verse 1, shows that this episode is integrated into the preceding sequence of events. Second, the central section of this text, Nathan's rebuke of David, forms a key transition in the story. This, with David's penitent response, is a crucial moment, for without Nathan's prophetic rebuke and David's sincere repentance, David's reign is in danger of ending as badly as Saul's did. Third, the frame, the A sections, sets the context for understanding the point of the entire story. References to the siege at Rabbah make it clear that David's adultery is not just a private concern. This is not a story merely about personal sin and repentance, but about David's failure as the Lord's anointed. Finally, comparison of corresponding sections can enrich our appreciation of the text. 2 Samuel 11 begins with David remaining behind in Jerusalem, while Joab fights at Rabbah. David is negligent in carrying on the Lord's wars. 2 Samuel 12 ends with David going out to Rabbah to claim it and to take the crown of its king. In between, David's faithfulness to his royal calling has been lost and renewed. A more subtle insight comes from comparing the C-D sequence with its corresponding D-C sections. Bathsheba mourns, as we expect, after her husband dies, but David, strangely, mourns before his son dies, and afterwards rises from the dust, changes clothes, worships in the Lord's house, and eats a meal. Here we have a shadow of the gospel. David sins and deserves to die, but that judgment is instead carried out on David's son. Since his punishment has been borne by his son, David is released and goes out to take Rabbah. So also by the death of David's greater son, we, who also deserve death, are raised from the dust, seated at the Lord's feast, and sent out to conquer. As we shall see, similar insights emerge when we recognize concentric arrangements in Hesiod, Homer, and Virgil. Hesiod and Homer both produced their epics in the last third of the 8th century BC. From Hesiod's poems, M.L. West draws these conclusions about his life. His father came from the Aeolian city of Syme on the coast of Asia Minor, just south of Lesbos. He had been a merchant seaman, but found it difficult to make ends meet, and removed to Askra, an out-of-the-way village on the eastern side of Mount Helicon and Boeotia, presumably to make a living off the land. Here it seems Hesiod was born and brought up, together with his brother Perses. About Homer we know even less. Doubts about the very existence of Homer have been raised through the centuries, but the contemporary consensus is that a man called Homer did live and was responsible in some way for at least the Iliad, though there is more dispute concerning the Odyssey. Traditions from the ancient world inform us that Homer was blind and that he was from the island of Chios, off the coast of present-day Turkey. Virgil's life is much better known, but since his historical circumstances are crucial to understanding his poem, I have included a brief sketch of his life in Chapter 4. Heroes of the City of Man, Fighters Killing, Fighters Killed, page 85 to 96. According to the myths, the Trojan War broke out as a result of a beauty contest among 3 goddesses, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. During the wedding of Peleus and Thetis, the parents of Achilles, Ares, Strife, threw a golden apple among the guests, bearing the label, "For the fairest." Each goddess claimed it, and Zeus refused to pass judgment. Instead, he allowed Hermes to take the goddess to Mount Ida, where Paris, a handsome prince of Troy, was asked to decide. Hera bribed him with promises of power and riches, Athena with glory in battle, but it was Aphrodite's offer that Paris would be given Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world. That got Paris's attention. The only obstacle to the fulfillment of this promise was the fact that Helen was already married to Menelaus, prince of the Greek city of Sparta. Undaunted, Paris visited Sparta, and while Menelaus was traveling to Crete, he seduced Helen and they eloped to Troy. When the Trojans refused to return Helen or punish Paris for his adultery and his offense against Menelaus' hospitality, Menelaus gathered other Greek or Achaean princes to lay siege to the city. Though this story forms a background for Homer's Iliad, the epic makes only passing reference it. Nor is there any mention of the most famous incident of the war, that of the Trojan horse. Instead, the Iliad records the events of a few weeks during the 9th year of the 10-year siege of Troy. In the Greek original, the first word is menes, wrath, and the first line announces that the poem is about the rage of Achilles. Insulted by Agamemnon, brother of Menelaus, and leader of the Greek operation, Achilles withdraws from battle, and through much of the story he sits among his ships, grimly refusing every offer of reconciliation. The Iliad's focus on Achilles is fully justified, since the fortunes of the Greeks and the outcome of the war hinge on him. With their greatest warrior refusing to fight, the Greeks retreat before the Trojans, led by Hector, son of the Trojan king, Priam. Eventually, Achilles relents enough to allow his friend Patroclus to enter the battle dressed in Achilles' armor. And Hector kills Patroclus. Achilles' rage turns from Agamemnon to Hector, and he ravages the Trojans, finally killing Hector and then savagely dragging his body around the battlefield. The epic ends with Priam's night visit to Achilles' ship, during which Achilles agrees to return Hector's body to his father for burial. To understand Achilles' withdrawal from battle, we need to examine what is called the heroic ethic, the heroic ideal, or the heroic way of life. Sarpedon, a Trojan warrior, sums up its main tenets in a speech to Glaucus. "Ah, my friend, if you and I could escape this fray and live forever, never a trace of age, immortal, I would never fight on the front lines again, or command you to the field where men win fame. But now as it is, the fates of death await us, thousands poised to strike, and not a man's alive can flee them or escape, so in we go for attack. Give our enemy glory, or win it for ourselves." As is evident from this quotation, heroes viewed death, glory, and immortality in a particular way. Heroes expect no life of bliss after death. Book 11 of the Odyssey indicates that the early Greeks believed that the dead continue some shadowy kind of existence in Hades, but this is hardly worthy to be called life. Death is for all practical purposes the end, and this end is what defines human beings over against the gods. As we have seen from Hesiod's Theogony, the gods did not create the world, and they do not have complete control over what happens in it. Gods are more powerful than mortals, but this it only a matter of degree. At times in the Iliad, heroes fight, wound, and come near to defeating gods. Death is the one absolute boundary between the gods and humans. Men and women are mortal, while the gods are immortal or deathless. Death is, for the hero, always an imminent end. At his back, every hero continually hears Time's winged chariot hurrying near. As Simone Weil explains, all mortals know that at some point in the future they will die. For the warrior, death looms every morning as the inevitable future, and therefore every day the hero cuts off all hope, erases every future except death. War thus destroys all conceptions of purpose or goal, including even its own war aims. It effaces the very notion of wars being brought to an end. Though the hero knows that his life is short and death is the end, he wants to live forever. The only way to achieve eternal life is to fill the brief days of life with deeds of such glory that people will remember and celebrate them in song and poetry after the hero is gone. Thus the Greek word kleos refers both to a hero's reputation for glory and to the songs poets sing about him. Living and dying with glory, the hero is no longer a mere man, but has become eternal like the deathless gods. In its extreme form, a man guided by this ideal will devote his life to achieving a reputation for courage, strength, and bravery. And he will protect that reputation against all challenges. Just as the deathless gods are completely self-absorbed, so the consistent hero is concerned above all with his own name. The answer to the first question of the hero's catechism is, man's chief end is to glorify himself forever. Two haunting lines in Book 4 capture the heroic view of war and death. Screams of men and cries of triumph breaking in one breath, fighters killing, fighters killed, and the ground streamed blood. With their matter-of-fact fighters killing, fighters killed, these lines capture the Homeric sense that the destruction of war is, as C.S. Lewis put it, all in the day's work. The parallel of the two phrases suggests that the two are indistinguishable. Is there any difference between killing and being killed? For the hero, not much. A hero gains glory by killing, but he can also achieve immortality by a heroic death. The equality between killing and being killed is horrifically captured in the first line, where the screams of the dying and the exultation of their killers harmonize in a chorus of bestial shrieks. Heroism is a highly individualistic and competitive ideal, for heroes do not even want their friends to surpass them in glory. This overriding desire for kleos, however, is softened by an emphasis on the love, philos, that a hero is supposed to have for his fellow warriors. This is a thrust of Ajax's appeal to the wrathful Achilles in Book 9. Achilles. He's made his own proud spirit so wild in his chest, so savage, not a thought for his comrades' love. We honored him past all others by the ships. Achilles, put some human kindness in your heart. Clearly, Ajax believes that consideration for one's fellow warriors is required even of a great hero like Achilles. As a central hero of the epic, Achilles' actions are played out between the poles of Kleos and Philos. Homer's attitude to the heroic ideal is complex. He admires the skill and strength of his characters. With his readers, he stands in awe of the sheer fury that Achilles unleashes during his final rampage. Yet Homer's epic explores the limits of the heroic ethic, examines its contradiction, exposes its ironies. Homer's presentation of the heroic ideal is made complex by the figure of Hector. Hector is not a wholly different animal from Achilles. Like his Greek counterpart, he seeks to enhance and protect his heroic reputation, and he speaks a number of times of the shame, Greek eidos, he would feel if he were to abandon the fight. More than Achilles, however, Hector's heroism has a social and political dimension. As a prince and the greatest of the Trojan warriors, Hector is fighting not so much for personal glory as to protect a city full of women, children, and old men. His eidos, shame, is connected not only with protecting his reputation, but also with his recognition of his place in the city and the obligations that this position places on him. Since Hector is who Hector is, it would be shameful for him to act the coward. As Seth Sheen points out, true eidos includes compassion toward the weak and helpless. For both Hector and Achilles, heroism imposes a tragic choice. For Achilles, as we shall see, whether he chooses glory or love, he will die. Hector's heroic dilemma is colored in a shade different from that of Achilles, but is no less tragic. Hector's philos is never in doubt. Instead, he is caught in the tension between these two dimensions of eidos, a choice sharply posed in his final battle with Achilles. Hector has to choose between the appeals of his parents and wife, his obligation to the helpless who huddle within the city walls, and his heroic fear of shame, of losing reputation. Choosing either of them leads to his loss of both. To retreat behind the walls means that he will not be fighting to defend the city. But if he stands to fight Achilles, he will die and leave Troy without a protector. Hector and Achilles can avoid disastrous consequences only by renouncing heroism entirely. Neither is willing to do that. The heroic ideal has been one of the formative influences on Western culture, similar in its influence to the ideal of romantic love that arose in the late Middle Ages and continues to this day. In different forms, a hero appears as a great-souled man of Aristotle's Ethics, the rational sage of Stoic philosophy, the Renaissance courtier of Castiglione. But this ideal is not confined to distant past. The heroic age ended centuries ago, but many modern people operate according to its principles. Inner-city gang members who murder because they have been dissed are heirs of Achilles, as is anyone who runs to court to defend every infringement on his rights. Leaders more concerned with their place in history than with ruling justly are seeking a kind of heroic immortality. As I write, America is in the midst of a nightmarish scandal, which has stretched over months because President Clinton has heroically avoided the shame of a forthright confession. It is important to realize that this ideal is not in any sense a Christian ideal. I do not mean that Christians cannot have heroes or that heroic virtues like courage, strength, and perseverance are unchristian. But the heroic ideal is bound up with a particular religious position. a particular view of oneself, and a particular view of what it means to be courageous, strong, and persevering. It rests on the idea that death is a final end for man, while the Bible teaches we all will exist, either in heaven or hell, for eternity. Heroism encourages self-absorption, where the Bible teaches us to imitate Christ's self-forgetfulness. Achilles wants to make sure that Patroclus steals none of his glory. The Christian, like Christ himself, is to promote the glory, reputation, and well-being of others more than himself. It would be a useful exercise to compare Hebrews 11, often described as a catalog of biblical heroes, with the heroes of the Iliad. That one becomes a hero by hoping for things unseen, or by patiently waiting for God to fulfill his promises. This would be nonsense to a Greek hero, but patience, obedience, and hope are the essence of biblical heroism. Much of the book of Jeremiah is an attack on the heroic mentality of Jews living at the end of the kingdom of Judah. Jeremiah insisted that the Lord had given the world into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar. To resist Nebuchadnezzar's conquest of Jerusalem and Judah was to resist God. One after another, Judah's kings rejected Jeremiah's counsel and refused to accept the humiliation of defeat and subjection, and Judah was eventually crushed by Babylonian armies. Jeremiah confronts us with this challenging lesson. Obedience to God sometimes demands giving up not only one's honor, but even the political independence of one's homeland. Had Jeremiah been seated on the walls of Troy as Hector waited for his final battle with Achilles, the prophet would have urged him to return to the city and lock the gate tight. During Jesus' lifetime, some compared him to Jeremiah. Like the prophet, Jesus battled Jews who wanted to resist the Gentiles, Romans in this case, with Homeric heroism. Not only the zealots who raised militias to fight the Romans, but even the Pharisees were resistant to the presence of unclean Gentiles in the Holy Land. Jesus' instructions in the Sermon on the Mount assume this context. Jesus is teaching his disciples how to live peacefully as a subject people and warning them not to resist. Each of the first three Gospels includes a lengthy chapter in which Jesus prophesies that the rebellious city of Jerusalem will eventually be destroyed because of its resistance to Rome. Heroic concern for honor is, the Bible clearly shows, disastrous both for the hero and for his city. Greek heroes need war to achieve immortality, and the Iliad is one of the great literary accounts of war. As with the heroic ideal, Homer's attitude toward war and toward the Trojan War, in particular, is complex. No one in the story has a modern attitude that war is a waste. They accept it as a matter of course, as nothing more than fighters killing, fighters killed. Yet Homer recognizes the costs and brutalities of war, which he depicts in excruciating detail. The Old Testament is full of war stories, but nowhere in Scripture do we find the kind of graphic descriptions of violent death that fill page after page of the Iliad. And Homer is aware of the suffering that war causes, especially to women and children who lose husbands and fathers. Yet Homer ingenuously shows us another side to war, one that we often are unwilling to admit. Its attractiveness, its severe beauties, its thrills. He frequently compares killing and risking death to the excitements of fishing, hunting, and other sports. Even if Homer did not love war, he powerfully shows us why many do. C.S. Lewis said that beneath the surface of Homer's worldview is not so much sadness as despair, especially despair that the world will ever be different. This despair is inevitable, considering the religious viewpoint of the ancient Greeks. Warfare, after all, not only dominates earth, it rumbles through the heavens as well. Gods and goddesses incited the war from the beginning, and throughout they take sides in battle and keep the war going. Hera and Athena, offended by Paris' preference for Aphrodite, joined sides with the Greeks against the Trojans, and Poseidon is also pro-Greek. With Apollo, Aphrodite defends Troy, and especially her favorite, Paris. Zeus is somewhat more even-handed, sometimes supporting the Trojans, but throughout much of the epic arranging all things to promote the glory of Achilles. Gods often play a direct role in the battle, causing random incidents. When an arrow falls short of its target, it is because a god has intervened, and when the tide of battle turns inexplicably, it is because the gods are stirring up one side. Gods kindle human desires and passions, whether for love or for battle. They are the source of all that is irrational and unexplained. The irrationality of the gods goes to their moral character as well. Zeus is considered the embodiment of wisdom, but he exhibits no ethical consistency. An incessant adulterer, Zeus fathers children randomly with goddesses and humans, a fact that mythologically captures Zeus's fundamental unreliability. How can mortals trust him when he constantly cheats on Hera? Yet the heroes seem not to notice the fickleness of the gods. In the flush of a day's victory, each side mistakenly assumes that tomorrow will again be a day of victory. At the beginning of the story, the advancing Greeks refuse to accept terms of peace, certain that Troy is ready to fall. When a few days later Hector advances into the Greek camp, he assumes the gods are with him and refuses to return to the city as night falls. On the following day, Patroclus, dressed in Achilles' armor, is on the field and pushes the Trojans back to their walls. Heroes, in Wheel's words, forget to treat victory as a transitory thing. Or, to say the same thing, they forget that the gods cannot be trusted. In the midst of the warfare that clamors through heaven and earth, the city is a preserve of comparative peace. Homer's poem is organized around the contrasting spaces of the city and the war camp. The world of the city is a complex and highly developed one. Within its walls are all sorts and conditions of humanity. Women, the elderly and children, workmen, slaves, and sometimes warriors. As Hector walks through Priam's palace in Book 6, we get a brief glimpse of the refined beauties of Trojan life, now threatened by the Greek siege. Across the battlefield, the Greeks camp among their ships and erect a makeshift trench and wall to protect themselves from the Trojans. Superficially, like the walled city, the camp has few of the features of city life. No women, other than war brides, who are more like objects. No children, few elders, no art or architecture. Most of the men of the camp are young, strong, aristocratic heroes. Between these two sites is the no man's land of the battlefield, the place where men fight for glory, where the city struggles against the camp. Homer's poem presents the city and its chief protector, Hector, in a positive light, but the doom of Troy broods over the whole poem. In a world of heroes, the city is a temporary holdout against the chaos of continual war. The Trojans will be defeated on the field. Troy's high and windy walls will fall. Its homes and palace will burn. City will be absorbed by camp, as all of Troy's women are taken as war brides. Like victory in war, the city is a vapor. Large sections of the Iliad are devoted to fairly repetitive and often grisly descriptions of battle, and it is easy to feel that it is a disorganized poem. In part, both the repetition and the apparent chaos are deliberate literary devices. War scenes are greatly expanded to give the reader a sense of the tremendous scale of battle instead of describing many years of war. Homer composed intense and lengthy descriptions of a few days of the conflict. The chaos of the text mimics the chaos of war, in which screams of triumph and death can hardly be distinguished. Homer's battle scenes are not, however, realistic. They are more like a series of duels than a real battle. Heroes frequently exchange taunts or reviews their family histories before getting down to business. Here again, the heroic ethic is in the background. One cannot become a hero by sending infantry into battle or by pushing the red button that launches ICBMs. Heroic warfare has to be man to man. Despite the apparent chaos, a number of devices help to unify the epic. First, a chiastic arrangement structures the whole poem, beginning with a quarrel and ending with a reconciliation scene. A glance at the connections between books 1 through 3 and 22 through 24 fills out the picture. Further, Cedric Whitman has shown that Book 24 reverses the arrangement of Book 1. Books 1 through 3 and 22 through 24 thus function like contrasting bookends to hold the rest of the epic together. Whitman explains that the chronology of Book 24 reverses that of Book 1. Book 1 has first the day of Chryses' appeal, followed by 9 days of plague, the day of the council and quarrel, and finally a 12-day gap till the gods return to Olympus. Book 24 begins with a 12-day period during which the gods grow steadily more disgusted with Achilles' excesses, followed by the day on which Iris rouses Priam to go to the Greek camp. 9 days are then devoted to gathering wood for Hector's pyre, and on the 10th day he is buried. Thus the day scheme for Book 1 is 1-9-1-12. Book 24 reverses this chronology, 12-1-9-1. By examining the sequence of days, Whitman has arrived at a more comprehensive, concentric arrangement. Importantly, in Whitman's arrangement, the embassy of Odysseus, Ajax, and Phoenix to Achilles takes a central position, and we shall see that it is in several senses a turning point of the action. At a number of points we will return to this scheme, since comparison of the related books is often illuminating. Individual books are also, we shall see, sometimes arranged concentrically. Homer also employs repeated type scenes that foreshadow later scenes. At several points in the poem, a single warrior comes to the fore in his hour of supremacy. Greek, aristeia, literally prowess. Thus, Diomedes, Agamemnon, and Patroclus have aristeia, the plural form, and all these foreshadow the coming rampage of the supreme Greek, Achilles. As in a musical composition, a theme is introduced, followed by a series of variations that come to a crescendo, da-da-da-da, followed by da-da-da-da, and da-da-da-da, and finally, with the appearance of Achilles, da-da-da-da! Similarly, duels between Menelaus and Paris, Book 3, and between Ajax and Hector, Book 4, foreshadow the climactic duel between Hector and Achilles, Book 22. Hector's death has been foreshadowed by two other important death scenes, those of Patroclus and the Trojan Sarpedon, and the deaths of Patroclus and Hector seal Achilles' own, though the latter is not recorded in the poem. Heroes of the City of Man, pages 97 to 105. The Rage of Achilles, books 1 through 8. Rage, menace, is, as I have noted, the first word and a key theme of the Iliad. Achilles is enraged because Agamemnon has violated his rights as a prince and equal, treated him as an outcast and underling, and claimed to be greater than Achilles. For Achilles, operating by the heroic ethic, there is no more serious insult. Achilles has been dissed, and he intends to make Agamemnon and all the Greeks pay. The circumstances of the insults are these. Chryses, a Trojan priest of Apollo, has asked for the return of his daughter, Chryseis, whom Agamemnon has captured and claimed as a war bride. Agamemnon briskly refuses the demand, but Chryseis prays to Apollo, who for 9 days rains arrows into the Greek camp, causing countless deaths. Desperate, Achilles calls a council to deal with the problem, and the Greeks prevail on Agamemnon to return Chryseis to her father. Enraged, Agamemnon demands that Achilles' war bride, Briseis, be given to him as compensation. To anyone familiar with the origins of the Trojan War, these incidents sound terribly familiar. Just as Paris abducted Helen from Menelaus and thereby started a war between Greeks and Trojans, so Agamemnon's theft of Briseis instigates a feud that divides the Greek camp. Within the first 400 lines of the epic, the drama of Paris and Helen is replayed 3 times. Woman seized, refusal to return girl, rage. Chryseis, Agamemnon, Apollo. Chryseis, Chrysis, Agamemnon. Briseis, Agamemnon, Achilles. Even the length of Apollo's assault on the Greeks is significant. Just as the Greeks have besieged Troy for 9 years, so Apollo besieges the camp for 9 days. 9 days of plague result from a man's refusal to give up a woman, complete with corpse fires burning on night and day, no end in sight. In all these ways, the opening lines of Book 1 present the entire Trojan War in miniature. Within the war between Trojans and Greeks, Greeks are now set against Greeks. In the light of our discussion of the heroic ideal above, the reaction of Achilles is important to consider. He seems to have loved Briseis in some way. He retreats to his ships mourning for her, and later claims to have loved that woman with all my heart, though I won her like a trophy with my spear. Yet his immediate and dominant reason for withdrawing is that Agamemnon has treated him with contempt and trampled his rights. For him, as for all heroes, honor, glory, and plunder are inseparable. Heroes achieve glory not only by doing great deeds, but by gathering hoards of booty, which serves as a proof of a hero's victories and enhances his reputation. Agamemnon's seizure of Achilles' war bride is thus an attack on his glory and self-respect. His withdrawal is calculated to enhance his reputation. He quits and goes back to the ships to show Agamemnon that the Greeks cannot win without him. When they begin to lose, they will realize that Achilles is the best of the Achaeans, and if he ever returns to lead the Greeks to victory, he will win eternal fame. In this sense, his rage follows directly from his heroic status. He defends his reputation and beats down anyone who cheats him out of his share of the spoils. Achilles is an ideal hero also in his godlikeness. Seth Shane has pointed out that Achilles is unusual in the number of his connections with the world of the gods. His mother, Thetis, is a minor deity, and Achilles is the only human in the Iliad who speaks face to face with a god. Since Thetis once slept with Zeus, Achilles has a direct line to the highest Olympian power, a fact reflected in the concentric structure of Book 1. Assembly of the Greeks, Agamemnon quarrels with Achilles. Achilles appeals to Thetis. Thetis appeals to Zeus. Assembly of the gods, Hera quarrels with Zeus. With Thetis as intermediary, Achilles makes sure that his complaint is heard on high. Achilles' anger, moreover, is described as menace, a word normally associated with divine wrath. When he returns to the battle later, his wrath has become demonic, in Shane's terms, inspired by the gods, and he is such an unstoppable force that he even fights a river god. Homer gives us a hero who is on his way to achieving the godlike status that all heroes aspire to. Ideal though he is, Achilles' reaction to Agamemnon's insult is unwise, as the elderly Nestor tells him, "You, Achilles, never hoped to fight it out with your king, pitting force against his force." In Achilles, heroism has been pushed to an extreme, and this extreme is intensified by Achilles' knowledge of his future. Every warrior knows that he will someday die, but Achilles knows from the beginning that he faces a stark choice. "Mother tells me, the immortal goddess Thetis with her glistening feet, that two fates bear me on to the day of death. If I hold out here and I lay siege to Troy, my journey home is gone, but my glory never dies. If I voyage back to the fatherland I love, my pride, my glory dies. True, but the life that's left me will be long. The stroke of death will not come on me quickly." Whenever he threatens to leave Troy for home, as he often does, this prophecy is very much in the back of his mind. Achilles' situation is an intensified form of the classic heroic choice, glory with certain death versus a long life without glory. One of Homer's aims is to trace out the consequences of extreme heroism. One consequence is that Achilles renounces other dimensions of the heroic way of life, specifically the love, philos, that a hero is supposed to show for his fellows. Like the kid who won't play unless he is made team captain and worshipped by his teammates, or the youngster who imagines his own death and thinks that then everyone will miss him, Achilles goes so far as to ask his mother to secure a Trojan victory. His goal is to increase his reputation as a warrior. When Thetis appeals to Zeus, she makes this explicit. "Come, grant the Trojans victory after victory, till the Achaean armies pay my dear son back, building higher the honor he deserves." Achilles is willing to let his fellow Greeks be slaughtered so long as it increases his kleos. The extremity of his heroism thus isolates him from the society of heroes. Another consequence of Achilles' extreme adherence to the heroic code of glory is more sharply ironic. Achilles has such a fine sense of his own gifts and worth that he withdraws from war when Agamemnon claims superiority. But the battlefield is the only place where he can display his gifts and worth. His heroism is so extreme that he becomes an anti-hero, and when we next see him, he is sitting among his ships, singing about the great deeds of heroes. Achilles should be providing material for heroic songs, not singing them. A final point from this initial situation has to do with the role of women in the heroic world. Women are much more prominent in the Odyssey, but in the Iliad they naturally tend to be on the sidelines. Yet their role is crucial. Greeks and Trojans are fighting over a woman, and so are Agamemnon and Achilles. Fittingly, while the battle rages outside, Helen sits within the city weaving a robe with scenes of the war. Weaving frequently symbolizes fate in ancient literature. The gods or the fates weave a man's destiny. Men fight, but the unfaithful woman who caused the war sits within the city, weaving slaughter. There is a slight whiff of Hesiod in the air. Helen, Chryseis, and Briseis are Pandoras, women who open the box that unleashes the furies of war. Helen's beauty is like Pandora's, a terrible beauty, but Homer is not a misogynist, a hater of women, and even Helen is presented with great sympathy. She despises Paris, which says something for her taste in men, which is both brutally honest and pitiable, and she genuinely laments the pain she has caused to good men like Hector. Though Helen is a chief cause of the war, she is also one of its chief victims. Agamemnon's blunder in handling Achilles infects the entire Greek camp. Women's concentric outline of the first half of Book 2 highlights this. Dream from Zeus, Greek council, assembly of troops, Greeks rush for ships, Odysseus reassembles troops, Greek council, sacrifice to Zeus. During the first assembly of troops, Agamemnon foolishly tests his men by telling them they can go home. The Greeks madly rush for the ships, shrill sounds hitting the heavens, fighters racing for home, knocking the blocks out underneath the hulls. The scene occupies a central position in Book 2, and thus is thematically prominent. Odysseus intervenes to hold back the flood and bring the warriors back to order. Disaster is averted, but we are left with grave doubts about Agamemnon's ability to lead the Greeks to victory. The weakness of Agamemnon's leadership becomes clearer by a comparison with Book 23, which matches Book 2 in the epic's concentric structure. There Achilles presides at the funeral games for Patroclus, and with Achilles in charge, the camp is orderly and at peace. Conflicts occur, but Achilles intervenes with justice and firmness to bring them to a quick resolution. Agamemnon is a center that cannot hold, and he offends Achilles, who is, in Book 23 at least, the main centripetal force holding the troops together. In Troilus and Cressida, Shakespeare highlighted the disorder caused by Agamemnon. According to Shakespeare's conception of the world, everything and everyone has its proper place and is held in place by submission to proper authority. If a subordinate rebels, chaos follows. But the same thing happens when a ruler fails to exercise his authority in the proper manner. The specialty of rule hath been neglected, says Ulysses, Odysseus to the Agamemnon, and when authority or degree is shaked, which is the latter, to all high designs the enterprise is sick. Homer's view is similar. Like most Greeks, Homer assumed that the world was organized into a great chain of being. Every link in the chain had to stay in place. When the men tried to rise too high in the chain of being, becoming like gods, they were slapped back into place. On the other hand, men at war, as we shall see, became little more than beasts, slipping down the chain of being. For Homer, man's proper place is right in the middle. In some ways, this idea parallels Christianity. Men are required to submit to the Lord, not seeking to unseat God from his throne. and to subdue the animals under them. The Greek view, however, is timeless and motionless. Being virtuous means staying in your own place forever. For the Christian, virtue is obedience, and by the grace of God we do not remain where we are, but advance from glory to glory. In Book 2, however, the Greeks are all as blind as Agamemnon. When Thersites says in council that Agamemnon is shamefully leading the sons of Achaia into bloody slaughter, and has disgraced Achilles, a greater man, Odysseus beats him on the head with the scepter, and the rest of the troops laugh. Thersites is right, as we already know from Zeus's conversation with Thetis in Book 1. Zeus's plan to arrange the war to bring glory to Achilles unfolds through the epic. This gives a tragic coloring to the Greeks' confidence and casts an ironic light on Hector's decisions. For a time, Zeus holds off his plan, forbidding the gods to participate in the fight, as Diomedes drives the Trojans before him. In Book 8, however, Zeus begins to fulfill Thetis' request. When Hector then advances on the Greeks, he thinks he will continue to win, but this is just part of Zeus's plan to honor Achilles. Hector is a pawn in Achilles' game. So, however, are the Greeks. They will not learn the truth until Zeus has executed his plan, until the Greeks have suffered bloody slaughter. The parallels between the beginning of the epic and the beginning of the war form the background for the duel between Paris and Menelaus in Book 3. These two were the parties in the initial dispute that has turned into a protracted siege, and so it is appropriate that they fight to see who will take Helen home. Paris functions, moreover, as a foil to other characters. Achilles occupies one end of the heroic spectrum, a man so concerned with his heroic status that he refuses to fight. Paris occupies the other end, for he has no concern for the heroic reputation. Initially, Paris strides boldly out, but when Menelaus makes his way toward him, he dissolved again in the proud Trojan lines, dreading Atrides. Menelaus, magnificent, brave Paris. Hector calls him a prince of beauty, whose main gifts are the fine lyre and these gifts of Aphrodite, your long flowing locks, and your striking looks, and warns that Paris will one day fall on the battlefield to roll and couple with the dust, rather than with Helen. Paris stands on the side of Aphrodite, of women, of beauty, of art. Against him comes Menelaus, dear to Ares, the god of war. Dear to Ares, god of war. The clash of Paris and Menelaus thus becomes a clash of city and camp, beauty and battle, women and men. His duel with Menelaus confirms that Paris is out of his element. Menelaus takes Paris by the helmet and begins to drag him behind the Greek lines, with the chin strap holding his helmet tight, gouging his soft throat. Just in time, Aphrodite intervenes to protect her favorite, snapping the chin strap and whisking Paris to his bedroom filled with scent, where he eventually seduces Helen. Frustrated and enraged as when Helen first left him, Menelaus vainly searches the Trojan army for his opponent. But Paris is back where he belongs, in the soft and safe world of the bedroom. Because of Aphrodite's intervention, the duel intended to bring an end to the war is inconclusive. Yet for the moment, the truce stands, for oaths have been taken to Zeus. On Olympus, Zeus considers the alternatives. Do we rouse the pain and grisly fighting once again, or hand down pacts of peace between both armies? Considering Troy's generosity in sacrifices and wine libations, Zeus thinks of ending the war, preserving Troy, and sending Menelaus home with Helen. Everybody can be happy, but the rage of Hera and Athena will not be pacified. Hera reminds Zeus of all the time and effort she has expended planning and executing the destruction of Troy, and Zeus relents, though with the agreement that Hera will have to allow him to destroy a city someday. Zeus sends Athena among the Trojan troops to incite Pandarus to shoot an arrow at Menelaus. Outraged at the breach of the pact, Agamemnon condemns all the Trojans as transgressors who will pay dearly for their treachery. The irony of this condemnation is charged, for Agamemnon's fury at the Trojans remind us of Achilles' rage against Agamemnon's transgression of his rights. Moreover, we are again back at the beginning of the war. Pandarus is another Paris, reopening Menelaus' wounds and reigniting the conflict. Spatially as well as thematically, Paris and Achilles occupy extreme positions in the Iliad. Though he first appears on the battlefield, Paris belongs in the city and in the bedroom especially. Achilles, meanwhile, is as far from the city as possible, nursing his anger among the ships. Hector stands between these two poles, a middle position symbolized by his movements through the geography of the epic. At the beginning of Book 6, the scene shifts from the battlefield to the city as Hector goes from the field to ask the Trojan women to offer sacrifices and pray for their soldiers. This book may be outlined as follows. The battle continues, lines 1 through 83. Hector enters the holy city, lines 84 through 588. The number 1. At the urging of his brother Helenus, Hector returns to the city, lines 84 to 137. Number 2. Glaucus and Diomedes trade pacts of friendship on the battlefield, lines 138 to 282. Number 3. Hector encounters a city, encounters Trojan women, lines 283 to 288, encounters Hecuba, his mother, lines 289 to 365, encounters Paris and Helen, lines 366 to 439, finds Andromache and his son Astyanax, lines 440 to 588. Hector returns to the battlefield, lines 589 to 631. Apart from Paris, Hector is the only hero who moves across the boundary that separates the battlefield from the city. And, unlike his brother, Hector is equally at home in both. Hector's heroism is rooted in his ties to the city that he protects. Heroes of the City of Man. Pages 105 to 114. One of the strangest aspects of Book 6 is a scene with Diomedes and Glaucus that intervenes between Hector's departure from the field and his entry into the city. Diomedes has been on a rampage, controlling the field like another Achilles. When he jumps from his chariot to square off against Glaucus, he stops to ask if Glaucus is a god dropped down from heaven. Glaucus gives a convoluted explanation of his descent from Bellerophon of Corinth, and Diomedes realizes that his own grandfather, Oeneus, once hosted Bellerophon and exchanged gifts with him. Given these family links, the two agree not to fight one another and exchange armor, though Diomedes gets the better of the deal, anticipating the eventual Greek victory and the stripping of Trojan armor. Several things in this interlude are noteworthy. First, it highlights the role of gifts and hospitality in ancient Greek culture. Exchanging hospitality and gifts forms a bond between the giver and receiver. These bonds were supposed to be inviolable, binding even future generations to friendship. Against this background, this episode comments on the war itself, which is being fought precisely because Paris breached the rules of hospitality. Menelaus opened his home and table, but not his wife, to the Trojan prince. Moreover, in Book 4, a temporary truce has been violated and the war reignited. Even more pointedly, one episode in the story that Glaucus tells concerns a wife of Proetus, who accused Bellerophon of trying to seduce her. That is, Bellerophon was accused of behaving like a Paris. But the charge was false. If Paris had acted like Bellerophon, or even like Glaucus and Diomedes, there would be no Trojan War. Finally, this exchange is set in the middle of the account of Hector's return to the city. Perhaps it is meant to represent the kind of bonds formed by gifts, hospitality, and friendship that characterize a city at peace, the kind of bonds that the war has now rendered quite impossible. Glaucus and Diomedes form a little city in the midst of the battlefield, but that city is a small island in a sea of blood, even more fragile and short-lived than Troy itself. As Hector enters the city, he encounters only women. First, the wives and daughters of Troy rush at him, begging news of the battle. Then he meets his mother, Hecuba, Helen, and after an anxious search, his wife, Andromache. At the level of the story, this is perfectly logical, for all the men should be out on the field fighting the Greeks. Yet the prominence of women also reinforces one of the thematic structures of the epic. Cities, and the indoor spaces of the city especially, are the preserve of women, as the field is a place for men. The spatial division of the epic is also a gender division. This is similar to the biblical habit of identifying cities as feminine, daughter Jerusalem, or the bride city that descends from heaven in Revelation. Hector's role is to defend the women's city against enemies. Besides women, Hector meets only Paris, who is in the bedroom polishing his armor, the only man of fighting age who remains in the city. Hector rebukes his brother severely, observing that Paris sits safely within the city while Trojans die around the walls, and all for you. What on earth are you doing? Oh, how wrong it is, this anger you keep smoldering in your heart. Look, your people dying around the city, the steep walls, dying in arms, and all for you. The battle cries, and the fighting flaring up around the citadel. Smoldering anger, refusal to fight, lack of concern for his comrades, people dying because of one man's inaction. Now, who does that sound like? Homer has set things up to show that the two ends of the heroic spectrum curve around to meet. Paris would be more at home singing of heroes and being one, but Achilles is the one we actually see singing. And Achilles, who seeks only glory and renown, can end up like Paris, who cares not at all for heroic glory. In different senses, both Paris and Achilles are without shame. Paris is shameless because shame does not sting him into action, while Achilles is shameless because he recoils from every hint of shame and seeks to be filled with nothing but glory. Achilles' effort to purge shame to be without shame leads him to act as if he had no concern for his reputation, to shamelessness. Exclusive concern for reputation dissolves into a total lack of concern for reputation. If avoiding shame is your only standard of behavior, you can end up shameless. Hector, by contrast, is not shameless. Even Helen, though still attracted to the handsome Paris, recognizes how different he is from his brother. I wish I had been the wife of a better man, someone alive to outrage the withering scorn of men. This one has no steadiness in his spirit. Not now. He never will. Hector is moved by shame only because he is not only moved by shame. He acts like a true hero because he is more than heroic. On the one hand, he is itching to return to the field. Helen asks Hector to sit beside her to take a rest, but because he is the kind of man that Helen wishes Paris were, Hector refuses. Woohoo! Woohoo! Hecuba offers him wine, but he refuses to indulge in the delights of the city when battle is calling. Though he refuses and protests his desire to return to the field, he keeps stopping to chit-chat with the women and takes a long time to search through the city for his wife. Torn between the city and the field, even when he thinks of the battle, it is because he knows he is the lone defense of Troy. Hector's transcendence of the merely heroic is brought out in the scene with his wife, Andromache, one of the most famous and touching scenes in Homer. In this, their last meeting, Andromache is at the Scaean gates, the last point he would pass to gain the field of battle. The scene that follows thus takes place on the boundary between the battlefield and the city, and this setting reinforces our view of Hector as a man of both city and camp, a man poised between his sense of duty to Troy and his realization of what the battlefield will bring. He listens sympathetically to his wife's plea that he not return to battle, lest you orphan your son and make your wife a widow. When he replies, all this weighs on my mind too, dear woman, we hear a note of tenderness almost wholly lacking in other heroes. His greatest fear, he says, is that his dear Andromache will be dragged off from her land and forced to live as a slave. No, no, let the earth come piling over my dead body before I hear your cries. I hear you dragged away. That tenderness is exhibited also when he reaches down to pick up his young son, who recoils in terror at the sight of his father's helmet. Laughing, Hector removes the helmet, the capstone of his battle gear, picks up the boy, kisses him, and tossing him in the air, pronounces a blessing. If Achilles tried to remove his helmet, we suspect his head would come off with it. Hector is an unusually well-rounded hero, but he is still a hero intent on gaining Cleos. I would die of shame to face the men of Troy, and the Trojan women trailing their long robes, if I would shrink from battle now, a coward. Nor does a spirit urge me on the way. I've learned it all too well, to stand up bravely, always to fight in the front ranks of the Trojan soldiers, winning my father great glory, glory for myself. Praying that his son will be first in glory among the Trojans, he envisions him coming home from battle bearing the bloody gear of the mortal enemy he has killed in war, a joy to his mother's heart. Hector is the best that the heroic world can produce, but he is still a hero, and this will lead to his final tragedy. Hector's pity for his wife and child make him more likable than Achilles, but as David Gress has pointed out, Hector's pity, if pity it is strange by Western standards. He goes on to explain. It is a pity limited by his own pride and honor, his kudos, which does not permit him to survive and protect his wife and son, because to do so would be to court shame and to shirk his true destiny as a warrior. Even if that destiny brings immediate death, Hector feels no obligation to his wife and child as such. The only obligation he recognizes as unconditional is that he must uphold his reputation as a warrior. Christian or Western ethical rules of duty to others would have told Hector that his responsibilities as husband and father, especially if disaster was going to strike, outweighed his warrior's pride. The duel between Menelaus and Paris has been inconclusive, but Hector is still eager to see the war come to an end. So he challenges the best of the Greeks to meet him in single combat. The second formal duel connects Book 7 with Book 3. Book 3, Truce, Helen among the elders of Troy, inconclusive duel of Paris and Menelaus. Book 7, inconclusive duel of Ajax and Hector, Trojans and Greeks in council, truce. The only condition for the truce is that if one of the combatants is killed, his body should be returned for proper burial. This foreshadows the later duel between Hector and Achilles, which ends with Achilles defiling his enemy's body. The Greeks recognize Hector's prowess and shrink from confronting him. Even Achilles dreads to pit himself against him out on the battle lines where men win glory. Finally, big Ajax is chosen by lot, but after a lengthy and intense combat, they are parted and the battle ceases for the night. Strangely, Hector suggests that he and Ajax exchange gifts before the night falls. Come, let us give each other gifts, unforgettable gifts. So any man may say, Trojan soldier or Argive. First they fought with heart-devouring hatred, then they parted bound by pacts of friendship. Like Glaucus and Diomedes, they agree to cease fighting, bound as they are by gifts. Each army retreats from the field for the night to eat and sit in council. The Trojans are concerned about Diomedes' advance and are considering ways to bring the siege to an end. Antenor, a Trojan elder, suggests that Helen and her treasures be returned. He recognizes that the Trojans broke our sworn truce. We fight as outlaws, and therefore cannot expect victory. Paris, who feels no outrage or sympathy concerning the slaughter of Trojans outside the gates, becomes angry, and though he agrees to send back the treasures he stole from the Greeks, he insists, I won't give up the woman. This is not the first time we've heard these words. Agamemnon had said virtually the same thing to Chryses and then to Achilles. As Agamemnon's refusal endangers the Greeks and perpetuates his feud with Achilles, Paris's refusal to give up the woman perpetuates the war. Yet Paris's offer to return certain treasures to the Greeks is a concession, and the Trojans approach the Greeks with the proposal which they hope will halt the brutal war. Diomedes believes it is a move of desperation. Now at last the neck of Troy is in the noose. Her doom is sealed. Agamemnon seconds this response. Success today has given them hope for success tomorrow, but they have failed to reckon with the plan of Zeus, who spends the night plotting fresh disaster for both opposing armies. The next day, Zeus begins to execute his plan. As Hector rises to take glory, inspired by the gods, he eventually drives the Greeks behind their makeshift wall that separates the camp from the battlefield. Before he can destroy all the Achaean and all their hollow ships and turn home to the windy heights of Troy, night falls and the battle ends, but the damage is done. Achilles' stock is rising through the roof. Homer describes the descent of darkness with an exquisitely beautiful passage. And so their spirits soared as they took positions down the passageways of battle, all night long, and the watchfires blazed among them, 100 strong as stars in the night sky, glittering round the moon's brilliance, blaze in all their glory. When the air falls to a sudden windless calm, all the lookout peaks stand out, and the jutting cliffs, and the steep ravines, and down from the high heavens bursts the boundless bright air, and all the stars shine clear, and the shepherd's heart exults. So many fires burned between the ships, and the Xanthus whirling rapids set by the men of Troy bright against their walls. 1,000 fires were burning there on the plain, and beside each fire sat 50 fighting men, poised in the leaping blaze, and champing oats and glistening barley, stationed by their chariots. Stallions waited for dawn to mount her glowing throne. Like the night scene before Agincourt in Shakespeare's Henry V, A Little Touch of Harry in the Night, the impression of peace that this passage leaves is partly achieved by contrast to the relentless violence of the preceding pages. More than this, the passage gives a feeling of cosmic calm. Stars shining from heaven find an earthly mirror in the fires that dot the landscape, for both heaven and earth are at rest. It is in passages like these that Homer captures the grandeur of war, its thrill and beauties. Like the city, however, night is only a short reprieve from battle. The men sitting beside the fires are still fighting men, and the stallions champing their oats and barley wait for the dawn, when their masters will champ for a taste of battle and blood. Significantly, the passage takes a Trojan perspective whose spirits soared as their day of victory comes to an end. Knowing that Hector's advance is part of Zeus's plan to exalt Achilles, the reader realizes that the Trojan sense of the world's harmony is false. For now, Trojan campfires throw their cheerful light against the walls, and the stars glitter above. But soon the walls themselves will burn, and stars will fall from the sky. Heroes of the City of Man, pages 114 to 122. The Love of Achilles, books 9 through 17. While the Trojans dream of victory, the Greeks panic, and panic is, as Homer says, comrade of blood-curdling rout. Hector's advance has been devastating, and the Greeks realize their only chance for salvaging their siege is to enlist the help of Achilles. Gathering again for council at a feast, Agamemnon suggests, as he did in Book 2, that everyone go home, but Diomedes opposes this as the plan of a coward. Wise old Nestor suggests a better course, urging Agamemnon to give up his overbearing anger and seek reconciliation with Achilles. Late as it is, let us contrive to set all this to rights, to bring him round with gifts of friendship and warm, winning words. In Book 7, we saw a similar pattern. The Trojans decide in council to make some concessions and seek peace with the Greeks, but Diomedes refuses the offer. Agamemnon's attempts to appease Achilles will meet with a similar response. And this is hardly surprising, for Agamemnon's repentance is severely qualified. He does not take full responsibility for treating Achilles unjustly, attributing his actions to madness, blindness, and inhuman rage, like that of Achilles. Later, when Achilles finally returns to the battle, Agamemnon's confession is even less satisfactory. But I am not to blame. Zeus and fate and the Furies stalking through the night, they are the ones who drove that savage madness in my heart. That day in assembly when I seized Achilles' prize, on my own authority, true, but what could I do? Agamemnon's failure to openly confess wrong tells us something about his character, but it reveals a deep fault in the heroic ethic as well. If self-glory is the greatest good and shame the greatest evil, open confession of sin is simply impossible, for one cannot confess sin without risking shame. If confession is impossible, so is for genuine forgiveness. How can you forgive someone who insists in Clinton-esque fashion, "It's not my fault"? And if forgiveness and reconciliation are impossible, then so are friendship, community, and genuine fellowship. The heroic ethic is an ethic for the battlefield and the camp, and even in the camp it is a divisive force. One cannot build a city, or at least a lasting city, on such a basis. To his credit, Agamemnon is willing to do what Paris is not, return the girl, swearing an oath that he has not slept with her. More than that, he offers gifts to make amends for the offense he caused. Tripods, stallions, 7 women, the first choice of Trojan spoils. Generous though they are, These gifts have an insulting underside. Gift-giving, as we have seen, is one of the chief means by which ancient Greeks formed personal bonds, yet gift-giving is also a way of asserting one's superiority. If I give you $1 million, it establishes a connection between us, but there is no doubt who is dominant in the relationship. Gifts and bribes are not entirely dissimilar. By giving such rich gifts to Achilles, Agamemnon is implicitly continuing to claim superiority. This is more explicit in his promise to give Achilles one of his own daughters as a bride, to make him my son by marriage. That sounds good until we realize that the original insult was Agamemnon's claim to be greater than Achilles. If Agamemnon becomes his father-in-law, his superiority is established permanently and blindingly. That Agamemnon still intends to demonstrate his superiority to Achilles is shown in the outburst at the end of his speech. All this I would extend to him if he will end his anger. Let him submit to me. Only the god of death is so relentless. Death submits to no one, so mortals hate him most of the gods. Let him bow down to me. I am the greater king. I am the elder born. I claim the greater man. These are hardly conciliatory words. Fortunately, the embassy to Achilles consists of Ajax, Odysseus, and Phoenix, has a sense not to repeat Agamemnon's final statements. As noted above, Book 9 is a central hinge in the structure of the Iliad. It stands at the center of the epic, both continuing Homer's development of the issues raised in Book 1 and looking forward to the resolution of the second half of the epic. First, it reveals most pointedly how Achilles' heroism has been transformed into its opposite. Odysseus makes the first appeal to Achilles, and he addresses him as a hero. He reminds Achilles of his father's warning not to lose control of his anger, and his promise that by holding his rage in check, Achilles' comrades will exalt you all the more. Odysseus ends his speech by promising that were he to return, Achilles would be honored like a god. Think of the glory you will gather in their eyes. Achilles' response is shocking. No, what lasting thanks in the long run, for warring with our enemies on and on, no end. One and the same lot for the man who hangs back and the man who battles hard. The same honor awaits for the coward and the brave. They both go down to death. The fighter who shirks, the one who works to exhaustion. And what's laid up for me? What pittance? Nothing. And after suffering hardships year in, year out, staking my life on the mortal risks of war. His response to Phoenix's story about Meleager is similar. Meleager withdrew from defending his city when he became enraged at his own mother. He was eventually aroused out of his pout to beat back the enemy, but Phoenix points out that by the time the offers of gifts had been withdrawn, he beat off that disaster empty-handed. So Achilles runs the risk of entering this man-killing war without the gifts, which means that his fame will flag, no longer the same honor even though you hurl the Trojans home. Achilles bitterly asks, "What do I need with honor such as that?" He goes so far as to threaten to leave for home the next morning and advises the others to do the same. Knowing the prophecy that Achilles will die a peaceful but inglorious death if he leaves, this threat is a threat to abandon heroism entirely. Achilles is tottering at the edge of anti-heroism, for he is on the verge of choosing life over glory. Odysseus also appeals to Achilles' sense of duty, his philos to his fellow soldiers. Again, reminding Achilles of his father's advice, he urges, "You hold in check that proud, fiery spirit of yours inside your chest. Friendship is much better. Vicious quarrels are deadly. Put an end to them at once." Burly Ajax, a man of action rather than an orator, briskly makes the same argument. Achilles is so savage, not a thought for his comrade's love. Agamemnon's offer was sufficient, even if Achilles had lost a brother or a child. But in Achilles, the gods have planted a cruel, relentless fury in your chest. Achilles, while admitting that Ajax's words are well said, cannot get over the rage that rises whenever he thinks of Agamemnon's treatment. Like some vagabond, like some outcast stripped of all my rights. Achilles' godlike rage has isolated him from his fellows, and he seemed deaf to the imperative of Phelos. With regard to the plot, the embassy to Achilles has a double significance. On the one hand, Achilles' refusal of Agamemnon's offer ensures that Zeus's plan will go forward, that the Trojans will continue to have success, and that Achilles' honor will be multiplied. On the other hand, the appeals of his friends have some effect. Initially, Achilles threatens to leave the next day after Phoenix's speech, he wavers and agrees to put off a decision until morning. After Ajax's brief outburst, Achilles gives his final word. "You go back to Agamemnon and declare my message. I will not think of arming for bloody war again, not till the son of wise King Priam, dazzling Hector, batters all the way to the Myrmidon ships and shelters, slaughtering Argives, gutting the hills with fire, but round my own black ship and camp this Hector will be stopped, I trust, blazing for battle. As he goes, stopped dead in his tracks." This is still a decision to refrain from battle, but more importantly, it is a decision to remain at Troy. Achilles' change of heart, slight though it is significant on several levels. Achilles decides for heroism and glory, stepping back from the precipice of an anti-heroic future. He will not be a Paris forever. Given the prophecy that looms over Achilles, a decision to remain at Troy is also a decision for death, albeit a glorious one. What he responds to is not, however, a promise of future Kleos, but an appeal to Phelos. Thus he begins to be restored not only to his heroic destiny, but also to the fellowship of heroes. His godlike isolation begins to melt away. Achilles' positive response to Ajax's appeal foreshadows his later return to battle. Though he lusts for honor, in the end Achilles returns to battle out of love for a fallen friend. Achilles' rejection of Agamemnon's offer means that the plan of Zeus will move forward, and as it does, the battle reaches a peak of intensity. More than any others in the epic, books 11 through 17, depict the twists and turns, the horrors and triumphs of battle. Homer's descriptions of the battlefield and warriors, especially the similes he uses to describe them, help us determine some facets of Homer's view of the war. Many of his epic similes compare warriors to predators. Diomedes goes on a rampage through the Thracian part of the Greek camp. As a lion springs on flocks unguarded, shepherd gone, pouncing on goats and sheep and claw mad for the kill, so Tydeus' son went tearing into that Thracian camp until he butchered 12. Heroes are bestial even in their clothing. Agamemnon enters a field wearing the hide of a big tawny lion, and Menelaus walks beside him draped in a leopard skin, while Diomedes puts on a hide decorated with the gleaming teeth of a white-tusked boar, running round and round in rows stitched neat and tight. Like predators, heroes immediately leap to strip their victims. When a Trojan falls, the Greeks fight to strip his armor as plunder, swarming over him like flies on a fresh pail of milk, while the Trojans protect the body so that it can be taken back to the city for proper burial rites. These descriptions are not offered merely as realistic descriptions of an ancient battle, but have a thematic purpose. War is an opportunity for eternal glory as men seek godlike immortality, but it also turns its practitioners into something less than human. Battles end with feasts. The predatory feast of slaughter is followed by a sacrificial feast to the immortal, cruel gods. Homer also compares the heroes to forces of nature, especially fire and water. Wild as a swollen river hurling down on the flats, down from the hills in winter spate, bursting its banks with rain from storming Zeus in stands of good dry oak, while forests of pine it whirls into itself and sweeps along till it heaves a crashing mass of driftwood out to sea. So glorious Ajax swept the field, routing Trojans. Epic similes of this type not only capture the awesome power of the heroes, but also show something of the lack of moral grounding for the actions. A river is not guilty of murder when it overflows its banks and floods a city, nor a fire guilty of arson when it burns down buildings. Similarly, a hero is not guilted when he hews down his enemies and devours them. That is just what heroes do. Victims also become something less than human. Pisander and Hippocles seek mercy from Agamemnon, who rejects their pleas. And he pitched Pisander off the chariot onto earth and plunged a spear in his chest. The man crashed on his back as Hippolochus leapt away, but him he killed on the ground, slashing off his arms with the sword, lopping off his head, and he sent him rolling through the carnage like a log. Ajax kills a Trojan who falls like a cut tree, and when the Greek Meriones hits Harpalion with an arrow, the latter falls, gasping out life as he writhed along the ground like an earthworm, stretched out in death, blood pooling, soaking the earth dark red. Yet, as we have mentioned, Homer is also capable to capture the thrill that warriors experience in the midst of a battle. In part, he does this by comparing battle to the games of peacetime, hunting and fishing. Odysseus and Diomedes go after Dolon as a pair of rip-toothed hounds bred for the hunt, and flushing fawn or hare through a woody glen keep closing for the kill, non-stop, and the prey goes screaming on ahead. When Patroclus comes on the field, he plunges his spear into the head of Thestor and raises him from his chariot, dragging the Trojan out as an angler perched on a jutting rock ledge drags some fish from the sea, some noble catch with line and glittering bronze hook. Behind the scenes, the changeable gods affect the ebb and flow of battle. In Book 14, Hera seduces Zeus and puts him to sleep so that the Greeks can make a comeback. Just as Helen tries to distract Hector from the business of war, so also Hera takes Zeus's attention from the battle. The only difference is that Hector has more self-control. Homer depicts Hera's seduction as an act of war. Round her shoulders she swirled the wondrous robes that Athena wove her, brushed out to a high gloss, and working into the weft an elegant rose brocade. She pinned them across her breast with a golden brooch and sashed her waist with a waistband, floating 100 tassels and into her earlobes. Neatly pierced, she quickly looped her earrings, ripe mulberry clusters dangling in triple drops, and the silver glints they cast could catch the heart. Then back over her brow she draped her headdress, fine fresh veils for Hera, the queen of the gods, their pale glimmering sheen like a rising sun, and under her smooth feet she fastened supple sandals. This echoes the description of Patroclus and Achilles as they arm themselves for battle. Sex is Hera's chief weapon. Zeus falls for the scheme and takes her away to his own bedroom surrounded by the clouds. With Zeus distracted, the tide of war turns against the Trojans and Hector falls. Overall, however, these books depict a steady Trojan advance toward the Greek ships. Some of the best of the Greek heroes are wounded: Ajax, Odysseus, and Diomedes. Hector finally breaks through the makeshift wall that protects the Greek camp and set fire to the ships. Achilles' wish is coming true. When he returns, he'll be able to win glory over difficult odds while he sits in his ships. Every Greek is aware that they need him. Without Hector knowing it, the plan of Zeus is advancing, a plan that includes his death. The battle at the wall of the Greek camp is worth pondering for a moment. First, boundaries and walls played a more important role in the ancient world than in our own today. Practically, walls were necessary for defense, but they also had a religious significance. From a biblical perspective, we can note that God created an ordered world largely by forming boundaries between night and day, waters above and below, sea and land. Setting off boundaries is thus an imitation of God's creative act. When two people take a piece of land and divide it into two territories, a new situation is brought into reality, a new creation. This explains why forming boundaries must be done with care, justice, and prayer. And it also shows why the Bible warns against setting aside the ancient boundary stones. Heroes of the City of Man, pages 122 to 125. The religious significance of the wall is brought out at the beginning of Book 12. Homer describes the Greek ramparts. The Argive trench could not hold out much longer, nor could the rampart rearing overhead, the wide wall they raised to defend the ships, and the broad trench they drive around it all. They never gave the gods the splendid sacrifice the immortals craved, that the fortress might protect the fast ships, and the bulking plunder heaped behind its shield. Defying the deathless gods, they built that wall, and so it stood there steadfast no long time. Ancient Greeks believed that no boundary of protection could hold out against the gods, and so all boundaries were sanctified by sacrifice. Because the Greeks neglected this, their wall was doomed to be breached. The battle at the wall of the Greek camp also foreshadows a later battle at the walls of Troy. Though the Trojans had observed proper custom in building their walls, the gods had decreed a doom against them. Their walls were destined to fall. Even before Hector breaks through, Achilles has begun to take a more active interest in the battle. Standing on the stern of his looming hollow hull, looking out over the uphill work and heartsick rout of war, he notices that a wounded warrior is being taken from the field. His Philos aroused, Achilles sends Patroclus to find out who it is, and Patroclus discovers that Machaon, the expert healer, has been wounded. Nestor is there as well, and in one of his typically rambling speeches, the old man encourages Patroclus to ask Achilles to let him enter the battle, wearing Achilles' armor. The Trojans might flee, thinking that Achilles has returned to the field. Nestor's words appeal to Patroclus, who agrees to the scheme. Before returning to Achilles, however, he takes an arrow from the thigh of a fellow Greek and pours healing ointment on the wound. It is a good omen. Patroclus comes on the scene as a healer of Greek wounds. So he will be. In Book 16, he returns to Achilles and appeals to him to relent from his rage. Achilles is cursed in your own courage. Patroclus speculates that Achilles is staying back for fear of some prophecy. But Achilles denies it. No, my prince, Patroclus, what are you saying? Prophecies? None that touch me. None I know of. No doom my noble mother revealed to me from Zeus. Patroclus may not know it, but we know that he protests too much. Like Odysseus, he appeals to Achilles' loyalty to his wounded fellows, but Achilles is still more concerned with his own wound, the humiliation he received from Agamemnon. Yet he gives Patroclus permission to enter the battle, wearing his armor and leading the Myrmidon warriors. This represents an ideal solution for Achilles. He can continue nursing his grudge against Agamemnon and remain at his ships, consistent with his decision in Book 9. Because Patroclus will enter the battle dressed as Achilles, however, any victories that he achieves will partly be attributed to Achilles himself. Achilles can stay outside the battle and still receive glory. It seems the best of both worlds. He has found a way to dodge his heroic dilemma. Yet his plan is doomed, overshadowed by the plan of Zeus. Achilles insists that Patroclus should not attempt to take the walls of Troy himself. You must not burn for war against these Trojans, madmen lusting for battle. Not without me. You will only make my glory that much less. Achilles may have seen the folly of heroism in Book 9, but now he is back in the heroic form, itching for glory. He is beginning to taste battle, and he wants to make a meal of it. Achilles prays to Zeus that Patroclus will show courage, and that he will return safely, but one prayer the father granted, the other he denied. Patroclus would drive the onslaught of the ships, but denied him safe and sound return from battle. Zeus's plan may exalt Achilles, but it will first debase him. Achilles knows that as soon as he enters the battle wearing his armor, he is doomed to die at the windy heights of Troy. As if some infection attached to the armor itself, the same happens to all who wear it, Patroclus and later Hector. Patroclus equips himself well in the battle, driving the Trojans back, inspiring the troops and cutting off the Trojan retreat. Eventually, Hector and Patroclus face one another and fight like lions over the corpse of Hector's driver, Cabriones. On Patroclus's fourth charge, Apollo knocks a helmet from his head and he is wounded, left on the field for Hector to finish off. With his dying words, Patroclus predicts the death of Hector at the hands of Achilles. But Hector brushes off the threat, takes the armor of Achilles, pulls his spear from Patroclus's chest, and turns on another Greek. Zeus, meanwhile, has confirmed Hector's fate, accusing him of taking Achilles' armor against all rights. Patroclus, the healer of Greek wounds, has died, but from his dying, a new Achilles will come forth as a hero who will bring healing. Heroes of the City of Man, pages 126 to 133. Enraged Love, books 18 to 21. News of Patroclus' death and Hector's seizure of Achilles' armor devastates Achilles. A black cloud of grief came shrouding over Achilles, both hands clawing the ground for soot and filth. He poured it over his head, fouled his handsome face, and black ashes settled into his fresh, clean war shirt. Overpowered in all of his power, sprawled in the dust, Achilles lay there fallen. This description is patterned on earlier descriptions of death. Death descends over the eyes of men struck in battle, and they fall to couple with the dust. Patroclus was impersonating Achilles when he died. Now the original Achilles falls in a kind of symbolic death. Achilles is not merely sympathizing with his friend. He knows it is returned to the battle and his death is imminent. Eerily, Achilles' slave women gather around him, beating their breasts as if mourning for their master rather than their master's friend. Achilles dies. The Achilles that rises from the grave of mourning is the same and yet different. Grief is only part of Achilles' reaction. He is also enraged, as he has been throughout the story, but now his rage is turned toward Hector and the Trojans. In fact, grief and rage are indistinguishable in Achilles. Earlier, he lost the will to fight because of Agamemnon's treatment, but now his only purpose for living is to take vengeance upon Hector. He now recognizes that his anger has cost Patroclus his life. If he had not been sitting by the ships, a useless dead weight on the good green earth, he could have protected his friend. Seeing the effects of his rage against Agamemnon, he wishes that strife could die from the lives of gods and men, and anger that drives the sanest man to flare in outrage. But these are the words of an outraged man who is intent on perpetuating strife by taking vengeance. That he is still operating by the heroic ethic is evident, for he fully commits himself in glory. I'll lie in peace once I've gone down to death, but now for the moment let me seize great glory. Philos has not only turned his rage to Hector, it has revived his lust for Cleos. Meanwhile, the Trojans gather for council. Achilles has been standing in the Greek camp giving out a great war cry. Merely by his cry and by raising the prospect of his return to battle, he has driven the Trojans into panic. In the council, Polydamas speaks first, and like the Greek Thersites in Book 2, urges the Trojans to retreat to the city before dawn. He realizes that Achilles' rage will never rest content to fight it out in the no man's land of the battlefield. He will fight for our wives, for Troy itself. Behind the strong walls of Troy they will be safe. Not even his fury will let him crash our gates. This is sound advice, but Hector treats it with contempt. Aren't you sick of being caged inside those walls? Troy is already being plundered, for the Trojans have had to strip down their treasures to support their defensive war. He implies that the other Trojans are cowards, insisting that I, for one, I'll never run from his grim assault. But Hector will later do precisely that. The Trojans assent to Hector's strategy, for Athena has swept away their senses. But their senses have already been swept away by the heroic ideal that grips them. Acting as a hero in his passion for glory, Hector dooms himself and his city. Hector does not want to feel the shame, the eidos, that comes from being a coward, but he neglects the other aspect of his eidos, the need to pity and protect those who remain in the city, the wisdom that retreats to fight another day. Hera sends Iris to urge Achilles back to the battlefield, warning him that the Trojans are trying to capture the body of Patroclus in order to cut off his head and stake it by the city. Yours is shame will be yours if your comrade's corpse goes down to the dead defiled, she tells him. Achilles' anger concerning the threat to Patroclus' body will later be expressed in his mistreatment of Hector's. Achilles objects that he has no armor, and Thetis promptly seeks out Hephaestus, the smithy god, to forge a new set. This is one of the great illustrations of Homer's free use of a type scene. With Achilles ready to return to battle, we expect an arming scene, and do we ever get an arming scene? The description of the shield alone occupies a large part of Book 18. This great expansion of the arming scene is like using italics. Homer signals that this arming scene is the climax of the whole epic. Achilles is no ordinary warrior, and this is no ordinary shield. It is covered with intricate scenes that depict a world of gorgeous immortal work. An entire world in bronze. It includes the sun, moon, and some of the major constellations. And its outermost rim is encircled by the ocean, which surrounds the earth in Greek cosmology. Within this cosmic setting are scenes from two cities. The first is a city at peace. Within it there are weddings, processions, and dances, a court, and markets. The second city is under siege, as is Troy, but the city refuses to surrender, just as Hector has refused to retreat. Besiegers and besieged struggle at a riverbank, foreshadowing Achilles' later slaughter of Trojans in the river. Strife, havoc, and death join in and leave the land scattered with corpses. In addition to the peaceful city, the shield contains other scenes of what Simone Weil call the brief evocations of peace, in the midst of the relentless mayhem of war that dominates the Iliad. A farmer plowing a field, the harvest of a king's grain field, girls and boys gathering grapes from a vineyard. Above all, there is a dancing circle. Here young boys and girls, beauties courted with costly gifts of oxen, danced and danced. Linking their arms, gripping each other's wrist, a breathless crowd stood round them struck with joy, and through them a pair of tumblers dashed and sprang, whirling and leaping handsprings leading out in the dance. Contemporary popular dance is often a highly individual affair. John Travolta can gyrate around the dance floor whether or not anyone else is there. Each dancer shows off his stuff, lost in his own world, turning everyone else into a spectator. Folk dancing, by contrast, is a communal event, and thus a common image of social harmony and peace. Each dancer has his unique place in the dance, and there are leaders and followers. Arm in arm and hand in hand, individual dancers are linked together into a greater whole. But the evocation of peace has some ironic twists. In the peaceful city, two men are quarreling over the blood price for a kinsman just murdered, while the elders sit in a sacred circle, judging the case. It is significant that, unlike Achilles, the men contending in court are not pursuing vengeance by the sword, but fighting with words and arguments, the weapons of the city. They have subordinated their rage to the judgment of elders, something that Achilles had refused to do. More generally, the shield shows that violent death has as much a place in the city as on the battlefield. Dancers there may be, but some citizens do not follow the choreography. Later, Homer describes a scene of the cattle rumbling from the farmyard to pasture. It is a bucolic scene as the animals go along a rippling brook along the swaying reeds, yet it is interpreted by the attack of a pair of lions who drag off one of the bulls, gulp down the guts and black pooling blood, and fight off the herdsmen and gods who try to intervene. Troy's comparative peace has been shattered by the onrush of savage Greeks who tear Trojans like lions tearing prey. Some commentators on the Iliad suggest that the shield depicts an ideal world, but this is not the case. It depicts a world as it is, with its beauties and harmonies as well as its dangers and cruelties. Homer, however, cannot imagine any other world, and this is what infuses a worldview of the poem with despair and resignation. There is no vision of a world beyond strife. Peace and war lie side by side, both equally essential. At best, strife and murder can be subordinated to the rule of law, but Homer has no hope for a new city that descends from heaven, in which only righteousness and peace will dwell. Even the most serene evocations of peace, we should remember, are forged on a weapon of war. When Thetis delivers the armor to Achilles, its glory is so great that none can look at it. Dressed in it, Achilles seems a glorious god, blazing forth, ready to fight alongside Agamemnon. Their reconciliation is hardly satisfying, nor does it make Achilles a more appealing character. Though earlier he had professed to love Briseis with all his heart, he now seems to dismiss her entirely. Agamemnon, was it better for both of us after all, for you and me to rage at each other, raked by anguish, consumed by heartsick strife, all for a girl, as opposed to something really important? Homer says that the Achaeans rejoice that Achilles is swearing off his rage, but this is not quite true. Rather than giving up his anguish and anger, he intends only to beat it down by force. In fact, he has not forsworn his rage, he has only directed it to a new object. Agamemnon, for his part, refuses to accept blame, saying in essence, the gods made me do it. In the war camp, where only heroes live, this is the only possible kind of reconciliation. Achilles and Agamemnon agree to fight together. They will never, we can be sure, dance together. Achilles is ready for battle, but Odysseus reminds him that an army needs to eat and urges him to take a break for a meal. Since it involves a sacrificial shedding of blood, a feast will also be an opportunity to seal his renewed friendship with Agamemnon as a peace offering. Let Agamemnon present you a lavish feast in his tents, so you won't lack your just desserts at last. Agamemnon agrees. We can seal our binding oaths in blood. Achilles will have none of it. In some of the most chilling lines in the poem, he makes clear that he is interested in a different kind of feast, a different slaughter, a different sacrifice. You talk of food. I have no taste for food. What I really crave is slaughter and blood and the choking groans of men. Even after Agamemnon has delivered the promised gifts, swearing to Zeus that he has not slept with her, Achilles is not pacified. No comfort could reach the fighter's heart till he went striding into the jaws of bloody war. Good thing he has sworn off his rage. Books 20 to 22, the Aristeia of Achilles, have an intricate arrangement. At the beginning of Book 20, Zeus holds council and urges the gods to interfere with the battle. The gods make a tremendous ruckus, but when they get to Earth, they do nothing. Then Achilles meets Aeneas and Hector in succession, but both are rescued by gods before being killed. Books 21 to 22 follow a similar pattern. Achilles fights the river god Scamander, and this spurs the other gods to join in as they had threatened to in Book 20. Achilles then fights Agenor and Hector in battles that mirror each other. Both Agenor and Hector deliberate about whether to face Achilles before deciding to fight. In both battles, a god intervenes. Apollo rescues Agenor by taking on the appearance of Agenor and running away so that Achilles pursues him. While Hector is, like the false Agenor, running from Achilles, Athena helps Achilles by taking the form of Hector's brother and urging him to stand and fight. Thus, books 20 to 22 are organized in parallel panels. Book 20, gods threaten to fight. Achilles versus Aeneas, God intervenes to end fight. Achilles versus Hector, God intervenes to end fight. Books 21 to 22, gods fight. Achilles versus Agenor, Apollo tricks Agenor. Achilles versus Hector, Athena tricks Hector. Zeus's main goal in sending the gods into battle is to prevent Achilles from raising the walls, which fate has decreed Achilles will not destroy. Without the gods helping the Trojans, Achilles will win too easily. Symbolically, the intervention of the gods raises the battle to cosmic proportions. Not only Greeks and Trojans, but the whole universe fights before the walls of Troy in a great pagan Armageddon. No wonder the whole world quaked, as it does in Hesiod's description of Zeus's battle with the Titans. Some of the exploits of the gods and goddesses appear humorous. Achilles is a terror on the field, but the catfights between Athena and Aphrodite and Hera and Artemis, which ends with Artemis running back to Daddy Zeus, are hard to take seriously. The gods cannot really be terrifying or terrified, for they risk nothing when they enter the fray. Deathless gods cannot be heroic. We have seen many warriors in battle up to this point, but none like Achilles. His butchery has an almost religious power to it, as he spears Hippodamus like some bull that chokes and grunts when the young boys drag him round the lord of Hellas' shrine. Homer constructs a horrifying epic simile to capture the power of this charge. Over against Aeneas came Achilles, rearing like some lion out on a rampage, and a whole town of men has geared for the hunt to cut him down. But at first he lopes along, all contempt, till one of his fast young hunters spears him. Then, crouched for attack, his jaws gaping, over his teeth the foam breaks out. Deep in his chest the brave heart groans. He lashes his ribs, his flanks, and hips with his tail. He whips himself into fighting fury. Eyes glaring, hurls himself head on. Kill one of the men or die. Go down himself at the first lethal charge. Deeply wounded when Hector plunged his spear into Patroclus, Achilles now groans and glares against his attacker. Like the predator, Achilles shows no mercy to his victims. When Troas grasps Achilles' knees and pleads for mercy. He'd no idea, thinking Achilles could be swayed. Here was a man not sweet at heart, not kind, no, he was raging. Wild as Troas grasped his knees, desperate begging, Achilles slit open his liver. He storms through the Trojan camp, like inhuman fire, raging on through the mountain gorges, splinter dry, setting ablaze big stands of timber, chaos of fire. He is no longer a man, he is an elemental force of nature, relentless as death itself. Before Achilles, the Trojans retreat behind the walls of their city. Hector alone remains outside, watching as the fire spreads across the fields. Heroes of the City of Man, pages 134 to 144. Here we go! The Final Feast, books 22 to 24. As noted above, the last three books of the Iliad correspond chiastically, in reverse order, to the first three books. Book 22 describes a duel of Hector and Achilles, the duel that resolves the unfinished duel of Paris and Menelaus in Book 3. Book 3, moreover, gave us a first glimpse of Hector, while in Book 22, we see him alive for the last time. Hector stands outside the city walls, shackled fast by his deadly fate, while Priam and Hecuba urge him to run to safety. Fated he may be, but Hector is having doubts about staying outside the walls. Like Achilles, he nurses his quenchless fury. Like Achilles, he faces a heroic choice between a shameful but long life or a short and glorious death. If I slip inside the gates and walls, Polydamas will be the first to heap disgrace on me. I would die of shame to face the men of Troy and the Trojan women trailing their long robes, so now better far be for me to stand up to Achilles, kill him, come home alive, or die at his hands in glory out before the walls. Even now, however, he considers the possibility of laying down his weapons and trying to negotiate a deal. I could promise to give back Helen, yes, and all her treasures with her. We know from the previous books that Achilles is not in a conciliatory mood, and Hector knows it too. He'll show no mercy, no respect for me, my rights. He'll cut me down straight off, stripped of defenses like a woman once I have loosed the armor off my body. He expects Achilles to treat him the way Agamemnon has treated Achilles. In spite of this, he decides in favor of glory and immortality by fighting Achilles. There is no glory in the city, it is only on the field and in the camp. Achilles and Hector make precisely the same choice. Yet Hector's heroic choice has dimensions lacking in Achilles. He must not only choose between shame and glory, but he must choose between the city and the field, between joining his family and fellow citizens behind the walls, or remaining outside in the vain hope of defeating Achilles. He must choose between the ethos of being considered a coward and the ethos that would lead him to save himself and protect his people. When Hector chooses to fight, he is thinking like a hero, but he is also motivated by a love for Troy and a sense of responsibility for her protection, a patriotic sentiment that we find in none of the Greeks. As he fights Achilles, he is thinking of the benefit for his city if Achilles were killed. How much lighter the war would be for the Trojans then if you, their greatest scourge, were dead and gone. The irony of the situation is like that of the scene in Book 6 with Andromache. Hector, the city's protector, fights to save his wife and city, but to do that he must leave them. As James Redfield puts it, his act of defense requires a kind of betrayal. Achilles has no such motive. As the Trojans stream back behind the safety of the city walls, Achilles' rage turns against Apollo. Now you've robbed me of great glory, saved their lives with all your deathless ease. He warns the watching Greeks not to throw a spear at Hector, fearing that someone might snatch the glory Achilles came in second. Glory and fury are inextricably mixed in Achilles' heroic temperament. When Hector flees from Achilles, it is the latter's fury that drives him on as both men race for the life of Hector, breaker of horses. When Hector stops running and faces Achilles, he suggests they swear a pact. I will never mutilate you, merciless as you are, if Zeus allows me to last it out and tear your life away. But once I've stripped your glorious armor, Achilles, I will give your body back to your loyal comrades. Swear you'll do the same. These are the same terms that Hector demanded in his duel with Ajax, but Achilles' rage permits no oath. There are no binding oaths between men and lions. Wolves and lambs can enjoy no meeting of the minds. They are all bent on hating each other to the death. When Achilles delivers a fatal blow with a spear, Hector again begs at Achilles to treat his body with respect and accept the ransom that Priam will offer for his return. Achilles is adamant that he will shame your corpse while Achaeans bury my dear friend in glory. Again his fury rises to terrifying heights. "Beg no more, you fawning dog, begging me by my parents. Would to God my rage, my fury would drive me now to hack your flesh away and eat you raw. Such agonies you have caused me. Ransom? The dogs and birds will rend you blood and bone." Like the dogs and birds, Achilles feasts only slaughter and the choking groans of dying men. Intent on bringing shame to Hector, he drags his body behind his chariot back to the Greek camp, his dark hair swirling around that head so handsome once, all tumbled low in the dust. Hair, a natural crown, is associated with glory in ancient literature, but now Hector's glory lies in the dust. Within the city, Hecuba hears that Troy's glory has been laid in the dust and begins to tear her own hair, while Priam is mad to go rushing out the Dardan gates after his son's killer. They are not only fearful for the future of Troy, but see that Troy has lost its greatest glory. When Andromache sees Achilles dragging Hector away, she faints, flinging off her glittering headdress, her crown of glory a gift of Aphrodite. Naturally, her concern is for her young son, who will grow to manhood without a father to protect him from thieves and strangers. Hector's shame, the end of his glory, goes on from generation to generation. Significantly, she describes both her son's and her husband's humiliation using the image of food. While Astyanax once would only eat the marrow, the richest cuts of lamb, now he would be driven from the banquet. And all this because Hector lies among the Greek ships while glistening worms will wriggle through your flesh once the dogs have had their fill of your naked corpse. As Achilles' hour of glory brings shame to Hector, so Achilles' feast of slaughter robs food from Andromache's table. Troy is filled with grief, and so is a Greek war camp, though their grief is now expressed in a more dignified and less desperate way. Patroclus lies in a state on his funeral pyre, while all the Greeks drive their chariots round, giving the solemn honors owed the dead. As part of the funeral arrangements, Achilles sets out a feast and leads in a chant of mourning. The Greeks arm and ride past on their chariots, each casting his hair on the funeral pyre, sacrificing their own glory to honor the glorious dead. Achilles himself has been growing a lock of hair for the river god Spercheius, but he offers it instead on Patroclus's pyre. He had vowed to offer his lock and 50 rams when he returned to his home, but with the death of Patroclus and now Hector, he knows he will never return to fulfill that vow. Sacrifices are heaped up on Patroclus, along with jars of honey and oil, 4 stallions, 2 of Patroclus's favorite dogs, and a dozen young Trojans. As Homer says, Achilles' mighty heart was erupting now with slaughter. The funeral is a religious rite, but for Achilles it seems more like a continuation of the battle. And not only for Achilles, he arranges funeral games for the Greeks, a chariot race, boxing, wrestling, a running race, a duel in full armor, and archery. That these games are infused with the spirit of war is clearest from the chariot race. As Diomedes closes in on Eumelus and is ready to pass him, Apollo suddenly rages at Diomedes, whose eyes fill with tears of rage as he watches Eumelus pull ahead. Menelaus curses Antilochus as they race to beat one another to a narrow path of the track. "No one alive more treacherous than you. Away with you, madman!" When Idomeneus announces that Diomedes is going to win, little Ajax tells him to stop blustering, you foul-mouthed. Idomeneus responds in kind, calling Ajax stupid, stubborn, bullneck, and betting him that Diomedes is in the lead, and the two nearly come to blows. The ground rules for the duel are little different from the rules of battle. The soldier who gets in first and cuts a rival's flesh, who pierces armor to draw blood and reaches entrails, is the winner. Like the battle, the games are opportunities to achieve glory, including expensive prizes, animals, tripods, a silver bowl, gold, iron, and weapons. Warriors receive plunder in their games as in their battles, but their main goal is to show their superiority in warlike games. Epius, a boxing champion, sums up the attitude in words that remind us of Muhammad Ali. "I am the greatest." The parallel between war and games is suggested when Achilles calls off the wrestling match between Ajax and Odysseus, both of whom were severely wounded not long ago. Achilles is a healer. With the words, "No more struggling, don't kill yourselves in sport," he almost exactly repeats the words of the herald Idaeus, who calls off the duel between Hector and Ajax by saying, "Don't kill yourselves in combat." Even the rewards are similar in both cases. Achilles tells Odysseus and Ajax that victory goes to both, share the prizes, while Idaeus tells Ajax and Hector that they are equal in glory and the love of the gods. Zeus, who marshals a storm cloud, loves both of you. You're both great fighters, we all know that full well. In the heroic world, battles are games, dangerous and deadly, but games nonetheless. Games, conversely, are battles. But in the midst of this playful war, something has come over Achilles. He is not the same man who was feasting on gore and blood in the previous books. He seems finally to have sworn off rage, having received his fill of slaughter and choking groans. Little Ajax and Idomeneus nearly come to blows. Achilles intervenes to calm them down. Is this the same Achilles who has been nursing a grudge against Agamemnon throughout the whole epic? And there's more. Out of pity, he proposes to give Eumelus second prize, a mare, but the real second-place driver, Antilochus, objects. He suggests that Achilles give Eumelus another prize, who demands to be given his prize, threatening to fight anyone who tries to take the mare from him. Achilles relents and lets Antilochus keep his mare. Pity from Achilles? Can the one who is relentless as death relent? Whatever has happened to Achilles has happened to others of the Greeks as well. When the mare has been given to Antilochus, Menelaus springs forward to accuse Antilochus of cheating in the race. Antilochus, who has only just threatened to fight off anyone who tries to seize his mare, backs down. Lord Menelaus, you're my senior. You're the greater man. I'll give you this mare I won of my own accord. If only Paris had given up his mare. If only Agamemnon had given up Chryseis without demanding compensation. If only Achilles had given up his, admitting Agamemnon's superiority, the slaughter of the Trojan War would have been avoided entirely. Antilochus provides a moral barometer for the main characters of the epic, and shows them up to be stubborn, senseless. The generous, just, pitiable Achilles of the funeral games has again disappeared at the beginning of Book 24. While the gods feud about the body of Hector, Achilles is still mourning and fasting, still eating your heart out here in tears and torment, still full of heartsick fury. Yet though Achilles intends to defile Hector's body and leave it for the dogs, Apollo intervenes to preserve it. The pro-Greek gods resist him, but he reminds them of Hector's faithfulness in offering thighs of oxen and flawless, full-grown goats, and rebukes him for favoring Achilles, a man without a shred of decency in his heart, who has no shame. That description, no shame, strikes several notes at once. We recall that this is the same description given to the unheroic Paris. Achilles' lack of shame, his lack of concern for the reproaches of his fellows, led to the death of many Greeks, including his beloved Patroclus. But in the aftermath of his magnificent Aristeia, another dimension emerges. Achilles has no shame because he is filled to the brim with glory. Zeus accepts Apollo's arguments, decreeing that Achilles must receive a ransom from King Priam. Achilles must give Hector's body back. He sends Thetis to give instructions to receive Priam and Hermes to conduct him to Achilles' tent. Simultaneously, he sends Iris to tell Priam that Achilles will accept him, though he must bear gifts to Achilles, gifts to melt his rage. Here again we see the contrast of rage, war, and gifts. Gifts are the means of relation in times of truce and peace. Gifts bind men together in pacts. But we've already seen that Achilles refuses pacts and gifts. Agamemnon has tried this before, but in the spite of the gifts, Achilles' rage burned as hotly as ever. We are not as sure as Iris is that Achilles is no madman, no reckless fool, not the one to defy the gods' commands. Whoever begs for mercy he will spare with all the kindness in his heart. Hecuba's assessment seems more accurate. If he gets you in his clutches, sets his eyes on you, that savage, treacherous man, he'll show no mercy, no respect for your rights. She expects him to treat Priam the way Agamemnon has treated Achilles, and she suggests that the only fitting vengeance is to sink my teeth into his liver, eat him raw. Hecuba wishes to be a female Achilles, sharing his savage diet. Spurred by the gods, and by the reassuring omen of the eagle, Priam makes his way to Achilles, bearing a rich ransom of robes, cloaks, blankets, golds, tripods, cauldrons, and a cup. Guided by Hermes, he gets through the Greek line and finds Achilles at his table, having just finished his feast. This setting is significant. Achilles has not eaten during the 12 days since the death of Patroclus. He is fed only on slaughter and rage. Now his hunger for slaughter is satisfied, and he is returning to food, to the joy, fellowship, and satisfaction of ordinary bread, wine, and meat. Their meeting is like something from a dream described in lovely poetry. The majestic king of Troy slipped past the rest, and kneeling down beside Achilles, clasped his knees, and kissed his hands, whose terrible man-killing hands that had slaughtered Priam's many sons in battle. Awesome as when the grip of madness seizes one, who murders a man in his own fatherland and flees abroad to foreign shores, to a wealthy noble host, and a sense of marvel runs through all who see him. So Achilles marveled, beholding majestic Priam. This is one of many Homeric similes that is appropriately inappropriate. Achilles is marveling like a man who, having committed a murder, flees his homeland and finds refuge in a foreign land. But Achilles, not Priam, is acting as host here. Yet on another level, the simile is apt, since Achilles has killed a man and he now holds the hand of the host whose land he has invaded. Priam introduces himself by reminding Achilles of his own father, and he begs for mercy. Achilles is overcome with grief at the thought of his father, and the two weep together, bound together in sadness and loss. Priam weeping for Hector and Achilles for his father and Patroclus. For a moment at least, Achilles' pity extends beyond himself and his immediate circle, as he, apparent for the first time, sees the war from Priam's perspective. Poor man, how much you've borne, pain to break the spirit. Yet he counsels Priam to exercise a kind of stoic calm and explain human life in terms of theories, the theory of the jars. There are two great jars that stand on the floor of Zeus's halls, and hold his gifts, our miseries one, the other blessings. When Zeus, who loves the lightning, mixes gifts for a man, now he meets with misfortune, now good times in turn. This has a superficial resemblance to the Christian idea of providence, but it is really very different. According to Achilles' theory, Zeus distributes miseries and blessings arbitrarily. For the Christian, though, we cannot always see the reasons for God's dealings. We can be sure that he has his reasons, and they are just. Moreover, there is no promise of undiluted blessings in Achilles' universe. The Christian suffers now, but is promised to glory beyond imagining, and therefore lives in hope. Achilles suffers now and then dies, and therefore lives in despair. The best one can do is act like a stoic, accepting with calmness whatever comes along. Achilles treats Priam with dignity and sympathy, and we almost like him, but the rage is only just beneath the surface. When Priam asks for Hector's body and urges Achilles to return to your own native land safe and sound, he cannot know that Achilles' fate is already sealed, that he will never return home. But the mention of this possibility brings a dark glance and a warning from Achilles. No more, old man, don't tempt my wrath, not now. Don't anger me now, don't stir my raging heart still more. Priam is terrified, but even in his rage, Achilles has become more cautious. He tells his servants to prepare Hector's body away from Priam's sight, fearing that, overwhelmed by the sight of Hector, wild with grief, Priam might let his anger flare and Achilles might fly into fresh rage himself, and violate the laws of hospitality. He does not want to be a Paris all over again. Achilles and Priam agree to the terms of Hector's funeral. Achilles will make sure that the Greeks refrain from fighting for 12 days, the same period during which Hector's body was defiled, and the same period as the funeral of Patroclus. Then they seal their pact with a meal together. As Achilles fasted during the time since Patroclus' death, so Priam has fasted and remained sleepless during the 12 days since the death of Hector. After eating with Achilles, he sleeps in the Greek camp, a sign of his trust in the word of Achilles. Achilles' feast of blood and slaughter is ended by sharing a common table with his opponent's father. The shared feast of Achilles and Priam would have been a wonderful ending, but the epic goes on and closes instead with the return of Hector's body to the city, where Andromache, Hecuba, and Helen mourn in turn. Andromache mourns for the future of her son. I cannot think he will ever come to manhood. Long before that, the city will be sacked, plundered top to bottom, because you are dead, her great guardian, you who always defended Troy, who kept her loyal wives and helpless children safe. all who will soon be carried off in the hollow ships, and I with them. Priam organizes a funeral, which ends with a splendid funeral feast in Hector's honor, held in the house of Priam, king by will of Zeus. It is this feast, rather than the feast of reconciliation, that closes the epic. And for Homer, this is the only possible ending. A funeral feast is not a feast of celebration, but of resignation. In the heroic world, the world of continual war of glory-seeking deeds, no reconciliation, no peace, no feast can possibly be permanent. No battle is raging at the end of the epic, but the final lines are haunted, as the Trojans themselves are by the expectation of the 12th day, the day when the battle will resume, when the rage of Achilles, Ajax, Menelaus, and Agamemnon will be rekindled, and the fire of rekindled rage will consume Troy. There are beauties in the Iliad and even an occasional flash of genuine nobility, but the world it depicts is a world that knows nothing of the promise of a prince of peace, whose government and peace have no end, who invites the nations to an eternal banquet that will celebrate a final and total victory in a world without pain, tears, or death. This is the unimagined promise that fits the Iliad by its absence. Just finished her on. Now it's on to Heroes of the City of Man, pages 147 to 157. Here we go. Son of Pain, Homer, the Odyssey. Odysseus, Latin name Ulysses, is one of the enduring figures of Western literature. Prominent, though not central, in the Iliad, he is a main character in the Odyssey, and his exploits are mentioned in Virgil's Aeneid. Later he appears as one of the most famous shades in Dante's Inferno. Alfred Lord Tennyson devoted several poems to his adventures. James Joyce followed the Odyssey in writing one of the most notorious novels of this century, Ulysses, and motifs from the Odyssey are found throughout the poems of T.S. Eliot. Famous in Homer's epic for his disguises, Odysseus's literary personality has also gone through many transformations over the centuries. Tennyson's aging Ulysses, for example, complains how dull it is to pause to make an end, and urges his comrades, "'Tis not too late to seek a newer world." This Ulysses is a very Victorian Ulysses, aching to explore the far reaches of the world, to pass through the arch of experience, wherethrough gleams the untraveled world, whose margin fades forever and forever when I move, perhaps even to establish a colony on some African coast. This, by contrast, is how Homer begins. Sing to me of the man Muse, the man of twists and turns, driven time and again off course. Once he has plundered the hallowed heights of Troy. Many cities and men he saw and learned their minds. Many pains he suffered, heartsick on the open sea, fighting to save his life and bring his comrades home. But he could not save them from disaster, hard as he strove. The recklessness of their own ways destroyed them all. The blind fools, they devoured the cattle of the sun, and the sun god blotted out the day of their return. Launch out on his story, Muse, daughter of Zeus. Start from where you will, sing for our time too. As these lines make clear, Tennyson's questing, restless, exploring Odysseus is not Homer's Odysseus. Like the Michael Douglas character who goes berserk when he gets caught in an endless Los Angeles traffic jam, Homer's hero is just a guy who wants to get home to his wife and kid. Homer's second epic tells a story that begins in the aftermath of the Trojan War. It's one of the several return stories, Greek Nostoi, that recount the journeys, adventures, and eventual homecoming of the heroes of the Trojan War. Several other Nostoi are told in the course of the Odyssey. Odysseus did not return immediately to Ithaca, the island kingdom over which he ruled, but was blown off the map into a fantastic world of witches, giants, and monsters. Because of his delay, the men of Ithaca competed for the hand of his wife, Penelope, each hoping not only for a new bride, but to displace Odysseus from his throne. The suitors spend their time at Odysseus' house, slaughtering his animals for meals and drinking his wine. Telemachus, Odysseus' teenage son, does not have the strength or experience to protect his mother and his wealth from Penelope's suitors, so all must wait for the eventual coming of the king. Finally, Odysseus arrives in Ithaca, rescues his wife, avenges himself on the suitors, and restores order to his kingdom. Because the Odyssey tells of a hero's return from the Trojan War, many of the characters of the Iliad reappear. In the early books, Telemachus takes a fact-finding trip to Pylos, where he meets old Nestor, and to Sparta, where he spends time with Helen and Menelaus, now reunited. On his journey to the underworld, Odysseus encounters 3 of his old comrades in arms, Achilles, Agamemnon, and Ajax. Throughout the epic, moreover, there are references to events of the Trojan War and to the fates of other heroes who returned. Structurally, the plots of the 2 epics are closely parallel. In both, the hero is most conspicuous by his absence. Achilles spends a good bit of the Iliad sulking in his tents, and Odysseus is not at home where he is needed. In both, the hero's friends and comrades suffer by his absence. In both, the hero's return means terrible destruction for his enemies. Closely connected as the 2 epics are, striking differences are also evident, in part because the heroes confront different situations. On the battlefield of Troy, Achilles could rely on his superior strength and skill to mow down the Trojans. Each battle in the Iliad is a face-off between 2 heroes, and the fittest survives. Such tactics simply will not work when you are dealing with Cyclops or Cyclops and Sirens, or trying to steer between the man-eating Scylla and ship-swallowing whirlpool, Charybdis. More than once, Odysseus considers or tries to fight his opponents in the Achillean way. As his ships pass by Scylla, whose 6 heads poke out from a cliff to devour men, Odysseus puts on his armor and takes a spear in each hand. But it does no good. While everyone is staring in horror at Charybdis, Scylla snatched 6 men from our hollow ship. The difference between the wartime and post-war situation finds a parallel in recent history. From World War II to 1989, America's overall military strategy was simple: stop the Soviets. Now that we no longer square off against a mighty opposite, we have other, equally serious obstacles to overcome. But our methods must be more discriminating. So also, Odysseus' journeys take him to remote mythical lands where the struggle is with magic and monsters, rather than with other warriors. Monsters and women, and often goddesses, are dangerously seductive. Women appear infrequently in the Iliad, though their appearances are significant for various reasons. But women so dominate the action of the Odyssey that some suggest that it was written by a woman. Not only do women characters appear frequently, but they are strong and individual personalities. Penelope has wit and cunning to rival her famous husbands. Circe and Calypso both possess powers that challenge the hero, and Nausicaa, the princess of the Phaeacians, is like her mother, Arete, a formidable character. Women are far from being mere window dressing for the manly action. In fact, women such as Penelope and Circe are clearly superior to the majority of dim-witted and barbarous men around them. This does not make the Odyssey a feminist tract, and it does not even mean that the women are portrayed in an especially positive way. As we look carefully at the text, we shall see that there is more than a touch of Hesiod in the Odyssey. Subtle tacts are needed to navigate this world, and Odysseus is a man for the job. As Douglas Frame has pointed out, there is a linguistic connection between the Greek word nostos, meaning return, and the word for mind, nous. Strength is not enough. Only a man whose mind is fully engaged, who does not forget what he is and where he is going, who is full of cunning, or metis. Only such a man will be able to survive and triumph over the dangers of a post-war world. Odysseus is precisely such a man, a different kind of hero for a different time. Achilles bursts into the first line of the Iliad in a blazing rage. He is made for war and little else. He cannot suffer in silence. Odysseus, by contrast, is a man of twists and turns, who wears disguises and assumes false identities, who adapts himself and waits patiently for his opportunity to strike. Odysseus, for all his prowess in battle, is a man of cunning words. As Helen says in the Iliad, Odysseus looks most noble when seated, in the posture of deliberation and storytelling. In the climactic books of the Odyssey, he returns to the house disguised as a beggar and has to endure the mockery and physical abuse of the suitors before the moment arrives for his vengeance. Homer's Achilles assumes a disguise, much less enduring torment from lesser men, is all but unimaginable. Charles Siegel has brought out the difference between Odysseus and Achilles by attending to the use of the Greek word kleos, heroic fame, in both epics. For Achilles, kleos and nostos, fame and return, are exclusive of one another. If he chooses to go home, he gains no glory. If he fights for glory, he will never return home. This is not the case for Odysseus, who achieves glory by his return. Odysseus's method for achieving glory likewise differs from Achilles. When he finally reveals himself to the Phaeacians, Odysseus identifies himself as Odysseus, son of Laertes, known to the world for every kind of craft. Dolos, my fame, Kleos, reaches the skies. As Siegel points out, a woman can be expected to use a doloi, deceptions, for her Kleos, but a hero should win his Kleos in fair fight on the battlefield. Such would be the case if Odysseus faced other heroes like himself. Faced as he is with superhuman monsters and often with women and goddesses who are masters of Dolos, Odysseus's only successful response is to spin more intricate doloi. As in the Iliad, Homer continues to be concerned with order and disorder. The Iliad shows that men at war become something less than human. They slip down the chain of being to the level of animals, and when the men act like animals, there is no possibility of order among them. The Odyssey moves away from the chaos of war toward a restoration of order, especially the order of the household. Homer is showing the kind of character required to establish and maintain order. Not fleet Achilles or even patriotic Hector can bring peace. It takes the wiles and cunning of an Odysseus. In structure, too, the epics differ. The Iliad could have been composed by Achilles, who speaks straight on. There are few digressions from the simple storyline of Achilles' rage. The Odyssey is more intricately woven, beginning with 4 books in which Odysseus does not even make an appearance, the so-called Telemachy or Telemachie, because of its focus on Telemachus. The poem then moves to Ogygia, where Odysseus is exiled with Calypso. Books 5 through 8 describe Odysseus' departure from Ogygia and his arrival at Scheria, the island of the Phaeacians. But this chronological narrative is interrupted in books 9 through 12, where Odysseus tells the Phaeacians the retrospective story of his travels from the Trojan War to the island of Calypso. Books 13 through 14 take Odysseus from Scheria to Ithaca, but then book 15 interrupts with an account of Telemachus' return from his journey. All this fainting, this moving to and fro, this layering of time reflects the cunning of its hero. The proem, quoted above, reveals another parallel between the structure of the epic and the personality of its hero. Achilles is mentioned immediately in the first line of the Iliad. In the Odyssey, we learn a great deal about the hero in the first 20-odd lines, but we do not learn his name. Robert Fagles highlights the delay by inserting a teasing ellipsis at the end of line 15. All the survivors of the Trojan War have returned, but one man alone. We expect the man to be named, but nearly 10 more lines go by before Homer finishes that thought. This pattern of delayed identification, repeated a number of times in the epic, captures in miniature the plot of the entire story. When the poem begins, no one is certain whether Odysseus is dead or alive, and when he finally shows up at home, he is disguised so that few recognize him. In a number of incidents, he is an anonymous hero, a nobody, until the final moments. Delay is one of the tactics of this man of twists and turns, and necessary in a situation in which he is not sure whom to trust. Homer's proem reinforces this tactic by imitating it poetically, playfully delaying and putting us off before speaking the name Odysseus. In our study of the Iliad, we frequently noted the contrast of city and war camp, which with the no-man's land of the battlefield are the main zones in which the epic takes place. The battlefield is the space in which men achieve lasting glory and honor in the individual combat with their enemies. When Achilles does finally fight, it is not out of regard for the collective needs of the Greek armies, but because of a very personal grudge against Hector. The Odyssey is much more concerned with the proper order of the house, Greek oikos, and city, Greek polis. As the opening lines show, the epic is not about a lone adventurer, but about Odysseus as a leader of a crew. Odysseus' comrades failed to achieve their nostos because they are foolish. They lacked nous. Consistent with this concern for the proper order of social life, much of the epic takes place indoors, inside the halls at Sparta, Phaeacia, or Ithaca. Odysseus recounts his adventures after sharing a feast with the Phaeacians, and even the final slaughter of the suitors takes place within Odysseus' palace. Odysseus, unlike Achilles, is needed not merely to achieve his personal glory, but to restore proper order to his kingdom. Odysseus' Aristeia occurs not in the field where men win fame, but in the hall of feasting. Geography symbolizes this concern for justice and order. The Iliad takes place entirely on the seashore during a siege before a strongly fortified city. Odysseus' adventures are those of a seafaring hero, and many of the obstacles to his return are obstacles thrown up by the sea, heartsick, on the open sea, or by Poseidon, the god of the sea, his main divine adversary. The sea and its deity thus become a symbol of the chaos that Odysseus must overcome and tame in order to return. When he arrives physically in Ithaca, however, another surging chaos awaits him in the form of the suitors, and Odysseus' triumph over them is the final voyage of his journey home. Odysseus has not completed his Nostos until there is no more sea. This more politically interested stance is connected with the moral and religious perspective of the Odyssey. The Iliad is famously a morally ambiguous epic. It is not a story of good guys against bad guys. Instead, good and bad guys appear on both sides of the battle lines, and it is not at all clear that the best man wins. This moral complexity, or simple chaos, is reflected in the Iliad's description of the gods. They are at war with one another, and Zeus, far from ruling over all with justice and righteousness, arbitrarily distributes suffering and good as he pleases. See Achilles' analogy of the jars. By contrast, the Odyssey is much more tidy, to use a word of Howard W. Clark. There are clear good guys, Odysseus and all those who remain faithful to him, and clear bad guys, primarily the suitors, but also the various monsters that confront Odysseus on his journeys, which grotesquely mimic the suitors. And the good guy wins a victory in the end, leaving the suitors a bloody mess in the hall at Ithaca. Religiously, the Zeus of the Odyssey is the upholder of right, who avenges wrong and punishes men for their sins. In the poem, this tidy moral perspective is already evident. Odysseus' crew was destroyed as punishment for eating the cattle of the sun. Their recklessness of their own ways destroyed them all. Zeus is especially a protector of the stranger and sojourner, and he avenges himself against those who violate the customs of hospitality. Hospitality is one of the key issues in the epic. The suitors are bad guys because they abuse the hospitality and wealth of Odysseus' house, and the worst monsters that Odysseus faces are those who refuse to show hospitality to strangers. Related to this, Henry Fielding said in Tom Jones that the Odyssey is the eatingest epic, and one scholar has estimated that nearly 1 in every 30 lines describes the preparation or eating of food. Food is not just about getting enough fuel to keep your body going. Food has religious connections, for sacrifice is a chief ritual of Greek religion, and all meals involving meat are supposed to include sacrifices. Food is connected with social life, for the feast is a model of peaceful and harmonious community, and food is connected with morality and sin, for Odysseus' crew gets into trouble mainly because they eat the wrong things. Food provides a moral and religious standard by which characters are judged. This emphasis on food is fitting for an epic that focuses on a man who insisted in the Iliad that dinner should precede battle, a hero who says that his stomach is a tyrant. When we look at the theme of hospitality more carefully, however, doubts about the theological tidiness of the Odyssey begin to arise. Zeus, I have said, is a protector of the stranger and the defender of those who show hospitality. Well, sort of. Through most of the epic, this is the case, but there is a strange scene in Book 13 that calls us into serious question. The Phaeacians have welcomed Odysseus among them, bathed, robed, and feasted him, and after listening to his tales of woe, have sent him in a magical boat back to Ithaca. One cannot imagine a more hospitable crowd. Yet, as a Phaeacian ship returns home from Ithaca, Poseidon is angry that they have helped his archenemy. Odysseus and he decides to crush that fine Phaeacian cutter out on the misty sea. And just to make sure that the Phaeacians do not have another chance to show hospitality, he will pile a huge mountain around her port. One would expect Zeus, protector of strangers, to object. Instead, he suggests a better way of getting even with the Phaeacians. Here's what seems best to me. As the people all lean down from the city heights to watch her speeding home, strike her into a rock that looks like a racing vessel just offshore. Amaze all men with marvel for the ages, then pile your huge mountain round about their port. Promoting hospitality is all well and good, but when hospitality offends the honor of another god, that's just too much. Zeus has not changed all that much from the Iliad. He still pours out woes from his jars with scant regard for justice or right. Further, though Odysseus is a different kind of hero from Achilles, the heroic ethic still shapes his behavior. Odysseus triumphs after and through suffering, but his triumph is still a heroic triumph. The attention given to Odysseus' name and identity indicates this. Odysseus is given to deception and disguise. He hides his name and delays identify himself. Ultimately, however, he wants to make sure that his name is honored. When the Phaeacians suggest that Odysseus is too much the merchant to participate in games, Odysseus reacts as Achilles would. I'll compete in your games, just watch. Your insults cut to the quick. You rouse my fighting blood. In the final massacre of the suitors, Odysseus is, like Achilles, as relentless as death. Odysseus' name is significant in this connection. In Book 19, Odysseus' old nursemaid, Euryclea, is washing her disguised master when she discovers a telltale scar on his leg and knows he is Odysseus. Homer digresses to describe the origin of the scar and the origin of his name. Autolycus, Odysseus' maternal grandfather, had said, "Just as I have come from afar, creating pain for many, men and women across the good green earth, so let his name be Odysseus, the son of pain, a name he'll earn in full." Scholars point to the link between his name and the verb odysomai, which means to feel anger toward, to rage or hate. By his very name, Odysseus is thus a virtual twin of raging Achilles. His rage takes the form of suspicion, deception, trickery, very different from the overt raging of Achilles, but the same passion drives them both. Alternatively, some suggest that Odysseus is connected to the phrase, creating pain for many. So understood, son of pain is double-sided. Through much of the epic, Odysseus suffers as much as he causes suffering. Early in the poem, Athena asks Zeus, "Have you no care for him in your lofty heart?" The Greek for have care is odysomai. George Dimmock renders this, "Why do you, Odysseus, him, so, Zeus? Much pain as he has suffered," we are told. The first time we see him, in Book 5, he is staring out to sea from Calypso's island, weeping for the wife and land he cannot reach. And while he is among the Phaeacians, the songs of his exploits of Troy, performed by that Phaeacian bard Demodocus, make him weep. Yet his willingness to suffer pain is a strategy. For all the while he suffers, he is waiting for the moment when he can turn the tables and make his foes suffer. In all this, Odysseus is an unusual hero, but he has not abandoned the heroic ideal. Though he may suffer playing nobody for a time, the goal is to become somebody, even if he must severely Odysseus others to do it. A scarred hero comes somewhat closer to the Christian view of heroism than the scarring hero of the Iliad, Achilles. Yet even as a suffering hero, Odysseus is not Jesus. He does not crush the serpent's head by his suffering into death. He suffers until he has the opportunity to crush heads. Odysseus is identified by his scar, but he received the scar during a hunt. The Odyssey, despite striking differences with the Iliad, is still a Greek heroic epic, and Odysseus is still a Greek hero. We should not expect to find in it a model of Christian heroism or patience. Heroes of the City of Man, pages 158 to 167. The Image of His Father, books 1 through 4. One of the striking structural features of the Odyssey is that the title character does not appear in the first 4 books. He is stranded on the island of Ogygia with Calypso, a bewitching nymph and lustrous goddess, who holds him while he continually pines to return to his wife and home. Calypso is related to the Greek verb kaluptein, to hide, and Odysseus begins the epic hidden in several senses. He is hidden from the reader while attention is focused on the situation in Ithaca, an example of the delayed identification motif. He is hidden from Penelope and Telemachus, who do not even know if he is alive. More symbolically, he is hidden in the sense that he is not fulfilling the heroic demand to perform deeds that bring renown. So long as the suitors run riot in his house, Odysseus is losing reputation as well as material wealth. To be a hero, he must renounce marriage to Calypso and unveil himself in an avenging apocalypse. Though Odysseus is absent from the story, his predicament is mirrored in his sons. This is evident from the structure of books 1 through 4, and the Telemachy or Telemachia. Book 1 begins with an assembly of the gods on Olympus, and a similar scene is found at the beginning of Book 5. The repetition of this scene in Book 5 announces, "We're starting over again from the beginning." Both divine assemblies, moreover, discuss the situation of Odysseus, and both end with the god being sent to initiate a resolution to the crisis. Athena is sent off in Book 1 to encourage Telemachus, and Hermes goes in Book 5 to tell Calypso she must release Odysseus. Within Books 1 through 4, we can discern a concentric or ring arrangement with sections marked off by geographic changes. Book 1, Telemachus and suitors in Ithaca. Books 2 through 3, Telemachus and Pylos in Sparta. Book 4, suitors in Ithaca plot Telemachus' death. Thus the Telemachy leaves Telemachus in the same situation as his father. He is gone from home, and all ways of return are threatened by the suitors. When she discovers that Telemachus is gone, Penelope discerns the similarity of father and son. Why bent on rambling over the face of the earth, a darling only son? Your father's worlds away, God's own Odysseus, dead in some strange land. Book 1 and the first portion of Book 2 also have a concentric arrangement. A. Assembly on Olympus. B. Athena and Telemachus. B. Telemachus and Penelope. A. Assembly in Ithaca. This structure invites us to compare the matching sections, A with A and B with B. Let's begin with the assembly on Olympus. Poseidon, who has manipulated Odysseus' absence, is himself absent from Olympus on a business trip to Ethiopia. Athena, Odysseus' patron, seizes the opportunity to ask Zeus to help Odysseus get home. Her request interrupts Zeus's ruminations on the nostos of another hero of Troy, Agamemnon. The father of men and gods was first to speak. Sorely troubled, remembering handsome Aegisthus, the man Agamemnon's son, renowned Orestes, killed. Recalling Aegisthus, Zeus harangued the immortal powers. Ah, how shameless the way these mortals blame the gods. From us alone, they say, come all their miseries, yes, but they themselves, with their own reckless ways, compound their pains beyond their proper share. Look at Aegisthus now. Above and beyond his share, he stole Atrides' wife. He murdered the warlord coming home from Troy, though he knew it meant his own total ruin. Far in advance, we told him so ourselves, dispatching the guide, the giant killer Hermes. Don't murder the man, he said, don't court his wife. Beware, revenge will come from Orestes, Agamemnon's son. That day he comes of age and longs for his native land, so Hermes warned, with all the good will in the world. But would Aegisthus' hardened heart give way? Now he pays the price, all at a single stroke. Zeus espouses an interesting theology, complaining that mortals blame the gods for the troubles they bring upon themselves. This stands in some tension with Achilles' theology of the two jars at the end of the Iliad. More important here, however, is the example that Zeus refers to Aegisthus brought punishment upon himself by ignoring the warnings of Hermes, taking Agamemnon's wife, Clytemnestra, while Agamemnon was fighting at Troy, and then killing Agamemnon on his return. Agamemnon's son Orestes took vengeance in turn by killing his mother. That Agamemnon's wife was taken as just, for he had seized Achilles' war bride at the beginning of the Iliad. In the context of the Odyssey, the return story of Agamemnon, which is told several times at considerable length, is a warning tale for the main characters. The fact that Athena's request comes in the midst of Zeus's ruminations on Agamemnon indicates that his nostos is somehow parallel to Odysseus's. We can fit the main characters of the Odyssey into the plot of Agamemnon's return. Clytemnestra equals Penelope, Aegisthus equals the suitors, Agamemnon equals Odysseus, and Orestes equals Telemachus. By recalling this story, Zeus raises a critical question concerning Odysseus's nostos. Will Penelope remain faithful to Odysseus, or will she buy a Clytemnestra who beds down with one of the suitors? Will Odysseus be betrayed upon his return to Agamemnon, as Agamemnon was? Will Telemachus, the young son of Odysseus, prove himself as courageous or as Orestes, who killed his own mother to avenge his father's murder? The Agamemnon story is an indicator of the tragic potential of the initial Situation in Ithaca. Odysseus could end as badly as Agamemnon. Agamemnon's story is an appropriate warning, then, to Odysseus. This is the way Agamemnon himself uses a story when he speaks to Odysseus in the underworld in Book 11. Though Agamemnon commends Penelope's faithfulness, he is understandably suspicious of wives in general and warns Odysseus not to stumble into a trap. If he wants to achieve his nostos safely, he must use his nous, every last stratagem of Metis, and he must meet the dolos of women with superior dolos. We know from opening lines of the poem that Odysseus hardly needs this advice. He trusts no one, and all his ways are shrewd. The story of Agamemnon is told to Telemachus several times in the Telemachy. Telemachus asks about this event while visiting Nestor in Book 3, and is given a typically long-winded account. Menelaus later gives a vivid account of how Aegisthus welcomed Agamemnon home, feasted him well, and then cut him down as a man cuts down some ox at the trough, which foreshadows the fate of the band of Aegisthus who are besieging Penelope. When Telemachus hears the story from Nestor, he identifies himself with Orestes. Ah, Nestor, son of Neleus, Achaea's pride and glory, what a stroke of revenge that was! All Achaeans will spread Orestes' fame across the world, a song for those to come. If only the gods would arm me in such power, I'd take revenge on the lawless, brazen suitors riding roughshod over me, plotting reckless outrage. Telemachus' enthusiasm for Orestes' violence makes it easy to miss the radical difference between the two young men. Orestes was avenging a father who had been murdered, but the suitors have not killed Odysseus. Telemachus exaggerates the tragedy of his situation when he compares it to Orestes'. Or does he? I want to suggest that the situations of Telemachus and Orestes are closer than they appear at first. This is true for several reasons. First, the suitors are acting as if Odysseus were dead, lounging around his house and treating his wife as a widow. There's not much difference between killing Odysseus and acting as if he were already dead. More is going on here, though. As Telemachus says, the suitors are busy devouring his house. And, as noted above, the food image is significant. The suitors are abusing the hospitality offered by Penelope and Telemachus, eating them out of house and home. Elsewhere, Telemachus says, "They bleed my household white," and in Homer, white is a color of dead bones. The imagery suggests that the suitors are trying to kill the house of Odysseus. Property and person are not, in Telemachus' mind, sharply distinct. An attack on a man's house and property is an attack on him. This is especially true in the heroic world, in which possessions constitute part of the glory of the hero's reputation. The prominence of gift-giving also highlights the intensity of the suitor's attack. In heroic Greece, rulers were not elected, and political power was not always passed from father to son. In the semi-feudal system, a prince gained the support and loyalty of powerful nobles by lavishing gifts of land and other wealth on them. A great house like Odysseus's would produce goods to be distributed to the household's advantage, winning friends and influencing people. Political power flowed to those who used their wealth to establish ties of loyalty and dependence. We still see an element of this even in modern politics. Democratic politicians in the U.S. have the unquestioned support of older Americans because they support Social Security programs that give tax funds to senior citizens. Given the political importance of gift-giving in heroic Greece, the plan of the suitors becomes clearer. By devouring Odysseus' substance, they are eroding the basis of his power. Even if he does return, he will have a hard time maintaining the support of the nobility if he cannot provide them with rich gifts. Further, he will not be able to pass on a large enough inheritance for Telemachus to hold power. Thus, as we shall see below, it is important that he not return from Troy empty-handed. Devouring the house, thus, has both personal and political dimensions. It is an attack on Odysseus himself and his reputation, and it is a coup, an attempt to unseat the house of Odysseus from its chief position in Ithaca. Telemachus, it seems, has good reason to use Orestes as a model. Vengeance against the suitors will be, as the divine counsel indicates, divine vengeance. As such, it will be appropriate to the crime. The suitors have violated the rules of hospitality, of which Zeus is the defender, and Zeus will hold them to account. They have been feasting on another man's wealth, and they will be destroyed in a feast of slaughter. They have been hoping for a wedding celebration, but they will have only a blood wedding. Yet Telemachus is simply not up to the job. This is brought out by the human assembly, which is planned at the end of Book 1 and takes place in Book 2. If the divine council indicates the seriousness of the crisis in Ithaca, the human council emphasizes that only Odysseus can restore order. In several ways, Telemachus' conduct gives hope that he is ready to take an active role in saving his house. He observes the rules of hospitality in his treatment of the visiting Athena. The action begins with Telemachus welcoming a stranger to the house, and the epic will climax with the appearance of another disguised stranger, Odysseus himself. When Penelope asks the bard not to sing of Troy, Telemachus sharply rebukes her and asserts his control over the house. Why fault the bard if he sings the Argives' hard fate? Courage, mother, harden your heart and listen. So, mother, go back to your quarters, tend to your own tasks, the distaff and the loom, and keep the women working hard as well. As for giving orders, men will see to that, but I most of all. I hold the reins of power in this house. When the suitors raise their lustful howl of protest, Telemachus also takes them in hand. You suitors who plague my mother, you insolent overweening, you must leave my palace. Telemachus seems to be coming of age, ready to take command. When the assembly meets the next day, however, he seems a younger, smaller man. His angry speech ends in despair. But now look, you load my heart with grief. There is nothing I can do. And dashing the scepter to the ground, he bursts into tears. He is indeed a boy who takes his stand among the gathered men. Books 2 through 3 describe his mentoring into the heroic life that prepares him to later stand at his father's side. The public reason for the trip is to find information about Odysseus from those who might have seen him. But his journey also initiates him into the world of men. As Athena tells him, you must not cling to your boyhood any longer. In this sense, the first books of the Odyssey reflect certain rites of passage in Greek and other societies, and Athena is a goddess that enables Telemachus to cross the threshold to a new stage of life. Prior to a certain age, boys in many societies are almost entirely surrounded by women, mothers, maids, nurses. At adolescence, they are made members of male society through an initiation ritual that often has 3 stages. Boys are first physically separated from their mothers. For a time, they are kept in an in-between place where they must endure various trials and where they can learn certain skills and the lore of the tribe. Finally, they are returned to the community, but now they are attached to the society of men. Telemachus' experience goes through these stages. He's physically separated from his mother when he journeys, without her knowledge, to Pylos and Sparta. He remains in those places for a time, learning about the Trojan War from some of its warriors. When he returns to Ithaca in Book 15, he's no longer a boy, but a man, ready to assist his father in the defense of his house and kingdom. Given the parallels between Odysseus and Telemachus, moreover, it is possible to see Odysseus' adventures as a similar initiation, a preparation for his heroic return. Telemachus has never seen a true heroic society in operation, which is to say, he has never seen a proper feast. Feasts picture how society should be ordered. The host offers a portion of meat to the gods, and the guests, arranged according to rank, receive gifts from the host and share a common meal. Right relations with the gods and among men are symbolized and therefore maintained by the feast. A disordered society cannot celebrate a proper feast. The host will not offer thanks to the gods, the guests will not know their rankings, and they will compete for a share of food rather than sharing. Telemachus has seen only the disordered gluttony of the suitors, who slaughter and eat without offering sacrifices to the gods, and who prey on another man's house. To correct these defects in his education, Athena suggests that he take a voyage to visit some of his father's comrades. This will expose him to the ways of heroic life and show him how to worship the gods and how to feast. This is why Homer describes the sacrifices that Nestor offers at Pylos in such great detail, and why it is fitting that Telemachus arrive in Sparta just in time for a wedding. During his journey too, Telemachus learns about his peculiar place in Ithacan society. Pisistratus, the son of Nestor, has grown up in the civilized court of his father and knows how to conduct himself. By observing and imitating his behavior, Telemachus begins to learn what it means to be the son of Odysseus. Telemachus has never known his father, but he learns about him through the exploits that are recounted in Sparta. These stories anticipate the hidden hero's character and foreshadow, in some detail, Odysseus' return. Helen tells how. Scarring his own body with mortifying strokes, throwing filthy rags on his back like any slave, Odysseus slipped into the enemy city, roamed its streets, all disguised, a totally different man, a beggar, hardly the figure he cut among Achaea's ships. That's how Odysseus infiltrated Troy, and no one knew him at all. I alone spotted him for the man he was. When Odysseus later comes to Ithaca in the guise of a beggar, he is simply up to his old tricks. His victory over the suitors is a continuation of his victory at Troy, also won by cunning. The last major character in the initial books is Penelope. Like Telemachus and Odysseus, she has her rough seas to navigate, and success requires skill and courage. Structurally, by including successive scenes involving first Telemachus and Athena, and then Telemachus and Penelope, Book 1 brings out a comparison with Athena. Penelope is a human Athena who has been able to put off the suitors with a clever ploy. She told them that she would make a choice among the suitors once she finished a funeral shroud for Laertes. Day after day she wove the shroud, but at night she undid the work so that it was never finished. This trick is significant on several levels. The loom is typically a woman's instrument. Men employ swords and spears while women work on the loom. Penelope's trick is a typically feminine deception, using the one weapon she has in her armory. Weaving, moreover, is often an image of fate and destiny. The world is pictured in some passages of Scripture as a garment, and in pagan literature the fates weave the mantle of the world. In the Iliad we see Helen weaving a robe that pictures scenes of the Trojan War, and Penelope is quite literally weaving the fate of the suitors, for by delaying her decision, she is leaving time for Odysseus to weave a web to entrap the suitors. Appropriately, she is working on a funeral shroud rather than the wedding veil that the suitors hope for. Ironically, the suitors have forced her to finish the web, sealing their own fate. Like her husband, she is a woman of twists and turns, whose very name is connected with the cunning art of weaving, for the Greek word pene means wolf or web. All this is hopeful, but Zeus's recounting of the Agamemnon story raises a question of Penelope's faithfulness to Odysseus. Will she turn out to be a Clytemnestra? The answer of the epic is not as straightforward as it might seem. Like Clytemnestra, Penelope is a woman who employs deceits. Both of them weave designs to entrap and eventually destroy men. Penelope's attitude toward the suitors is, moreover, complicated. The trick of the web is ambiguous, for it not only gives Odysseus time to get home, but also extends the suitors' courting. If Penelope had made a public announcement that she would not remarry, the suitors would go home. So long as she weaves, she gives encouragement to their hope, and she continues to receive their attention. At the end of the epic, she will reveal in several ways that she found some pleasure in the suitors, and that she came close to becoming, if not a Clytemnestra, at least a Helen. Yet, as Charles Siegel has put it, Penelope in the final analysis is using house-preserving dolos, which leads to glory and fame, while Clytemnestra's house-destroying dolos led to shame. When Penelope first appears, she stands beside a pillar that holds up the roof of the house. This is not merely a bit of descriptive color, but symbolizes what kind of woman Penelope is. Like the pillar, she keeps her husband's house from collapsing. At the end of Book 4, the scene is set for a replay or a reversal of Agamemnon's Nostos. Odysseus' palace is filled with prospective Aegisthus. Penelope uses trickery, though so far she uses it to remain faithful to her husband rather than to betray him. Telemachus is beginning to look like an Orestes in the making. Only the new Agamemnon is missing. Will he step into a trap? or will he set one? Heroes of the City of Man, pages 169 to 178. Book 5 begins where Book 1 began, with the scene on Olympus. Divine initiative has spurred Telemachus to take more active control of his destiny, and now Zeus determines that the exile must return, bearing bronze and hordes of gold and robes, more plunder than he could ever have won from Troy. The hero, who has been calypsoed, hidden on the island of Ogygia, must return, displaying the full glory of a hero. These parallels of books 1 and 5 suggest further connections between the initial situation of Odysseus and the situation in Ithaca, which are developed in the following books. Calypso is the first of the fantastic creatures we meet, and therefore is representative of all. Several features of the situation are noteworthy. Hermes finds her in a cave, a setting of such Edenic beauty and fertility that even Hermes' heart is entranced with pleasure as he stands spellbound. The enchantment of the setting is important for understanding its significance. As Odysseus will tell the Phaeacians later, he has been traveling through the land of myths and legends. By sending Hermes to release him, Zeus is not only helping to transfer Odysseus geographically from one place to another, he is calling him back from the world of unreal myths to the real world of Ithaca. Since his heroic deeds at Troy, Odysseus has been in no man's land, and that is no place for a hero. Though the epic contrasts Ithaca with the mythical world of Odysseus's journeys, it also brings out parallels between them, so that the two worlds illuminate and mirror each other. When Hermes arrives, Calypso is inside her cave, singing and weaving. In the context of the Odyssey, Calypso's weaving associates her with Penelope. Just as Penelope has used weaving to delay what she feels is an inevitable decision, so Calypso weaves, hoping she will never have to part with Odysseus, hoping she is weaving his fate. Unlike the suitors, however, Odysseus is a reluctant guest, not a suitor at all. Light may be directed in the other direction as well. If Calypso is a nymph version of Penelope, Penelope has something of the enchantress about her, for she has woven a spell over the suitors. The parallel of Calypso and Penelope also highlights an important feature of the poem's presentation of women. Odysseus encounters several alluring women in the course of his travels, not only Calypso, but Circe and Nausicaa. And some of his other adventures also involve feminine, though not overtly sexual, threats, the sirens being the chief example. Sexual temptation is one of the distractions he must overcome if he is to reach Ithaca and deliver his wife, house, and kingdom. Two of these women have magical powers, Calypso and Circe. For Circe turns Odysseus's crew into pigs. Several of the women in this poem are more intelligent than most of the men, but this intelligence is present as another species of witchcraft, another weapon by which women seek to ensnare men and keep them from heroic deeds. However sympathetic his portrayals of women, Homer, like Hesiod, sees women as sources of temptation and a distraction from the proper work of men. Pleasurable to be sure, women can also be dangerous, cunning, too curious, and always potential Pandoras. They are Calypsos, who weave their designs to keep men hidden indoors, at home, and in bed. From a Christian perspective, Odysseus's resistance to sexual temptation leaves a great deal to be desired. The poem makes clear that he is sleeping with Calypso during the 7 years of his captivity on her island. Even when he refuses to stay with her and professes his undying wish to return home, withdrawing into the cavern's deep recesses, long in each other's arms, they lost themselves in love. The poets protest that he had no choice, unwilling lover alongside lover all too willing. Sounds false. His earlier statement that Odysseus had grown bored with Calypso, the nymph no longer pleased, is probably more accurate, but boredom does not prevent him from taking his pleasure with her. When he encounters Circe and demands that she release his crew from the spell, she is impressed with him and invites him to bed. Suspicious, he responds, "Mount your bed? Not for all the world." But his refusal is only partial. "Not until you consent to swear, goddess, a binding oath you'll never plot some new intrigue to harm me." After she has sworn, then, at last, I mounted Circe's gorgeous bed. As long as it's safe sex. Sexual purity in the Christian sense, brilliantly portrayed in Book 3 of Edmund Spenser's Faerie Queene, simply is not heroic virtue. Sexual control is. In the scene with Circe, it is important that Odysseus refuses to mount her bed until he has assurances that she will release his men from the spell. Later, he will tell Phaeacians how he was tied to the ship's mast so that he would not succumb to the alluring song of the sirens. His cunning helps him gain control of sexually charged situations, keeps him from being turned into a beast by Circe, and protects him from joining the rotting corpses in the field of the sirens. Sexual control is an aspect of Odysseus's metis. Calypso's temptation is not, however, mainly sexual. Reminding Odysseus what pains are fated to fill your cup before you reach the shore, she urges him to preside in our house with me and be immortal. Odysseus refuses. Within the heroic world of the Odyssey, this offer has several layers of significance. Immortality is what all heroes pursue. They want their deeds remembered and celebrated forever. Yet Calypso offers a very unheroic immortality, not one at the cost of suffering, hardship, and battle, but an immortality that comes simply as a gift, and it would be a very inactive sort of immortality. It is not eternal life so much as eternal stagnation. With Calypso, Odysseus's life would consist of languid days followed by nights of love. But Odysseus has already grown weary of the nymph and her life. In rejecting her offer, he is rejecting one kind of immortality for another. He is embracing his heroic destiny with all its pain and hardships. He will not seek to escape his name, son of pain.
Calypso also represents the temptation to forget who he is and the kind of deeds that are expected of such a man. The real temptation for the hero is to renounce his heroic calling. In this way, we can see that Odysseus' choice is very much like that of Achilles in the Iliad. A long life of ease in the hiddenness of Calypso's cave versus a shorter life, a strenuous exertion followed by public and eternal glory. Like Achilles, heroic Odysseus can really only choose the latter. In the end, as Seth Keen points out, Calypso's offer represents a kind of death for Odysseus. A hidden hero, one with no name and no deeds, is as good as dead. Immortality without heroic exertion is no life. Here, Homer's Odysseus and Tennyson's Ulysses are one, for neither accepts the idea that to breathe is life. Odysseus is conscious that he is choosing a mortal, and therefore inferior life and a mortal wife. Calypso cannot understand. Much as you long to see your wife, the one you pine for all your days, and yet I just might claim to be nothing less than she, neither in face nor figure. Hardly right, is it, for mortal woman to rival immortal goddess? Odysseus agrees. All that you say is true, how well I know. Look at my wife Penelope. She falls far short of you, your beauty, stature. She is mortal after all, and you never age or die. Nevertheless, I long, I pine all my days, to travel home and see the day of my return. Odysseus chooses to be human rather than to seek to be a god. Penelope is the main attraction of his return, but she is not the only one. The first time we see Odysseus, he is sitting on the headlong looking over the sea, weeping, his eyes never dry, his sweet life flowing away with the tears he wept for his spoiled journey home. He also longs for the day of my return, the glorious day of his vengeance. The forlorn lover he may be, but he is also thinking like a hero. Unfortunately, leaving Calypso means crossing the sea, and Poseidon comes back from his business trip just in time to see Odysseus making his way towards Scheria. He throws a terrible storm that crushes Odysseus' craft and leaves him naked with nothing on the shore of Scheria. Odysseus left Ithaca with a fleet of ships and many young nobles fighting alongside. During the war and his attempted return, Odysseus had steadily lost the glory that he possessed when he departed. All but his own ship is lost at sea. Eventually, the whole crew of that ship was also lost, and the plunder that Odysseus had collected from Troy sinks to the bottom of the sea. When he leaves Calypso's island, he has only the clothes on his back and the raft that he built for his journey home. And now Poseidon has stripped even these last remnants of glory from him. When he is thrown ashore on Scheria, he has literally been stripped naked. This is the furthest step of the humiliation, his descent into the form of a servant. Journeying through the unreal world of myths brings him no gain. Skiria is the threshold between the world of myth and the real world. Oh no, I lost it. When Zeus determines to send Odysseus to the Phaeacians, he mentions that they are close kin to the god himself, and it is later explained that when they have sacrifices, the gods join them as guests. Nausicaa gives us geography, assuring her friend that Odysseus cannot be an invader. She said that we live too far apart out in the surging sea, out at the world's end. No other mortals come to mingle with us. More threateningly, Antinous tells Odysseus that the Phaeacians once lived near the Cyclops. Their customs are also unusual. Though Nausicaa assures Odysseus that they will show him proper hospitality, Athena tells him, the men here never suffer strangers gladly, have no love for hosting a man from foreign lands. Phaeacians, Nausicaa tells Odysseus, care nothing for bow or quiver, only for masts and oars and good trim ships themselves. We glory in our ships. Antinous concedes, we're hardly world-class boxers or wrestlers, though we can race like the wind. We're champion sailors, too, and always dear to our hearts. To feast, to leer and dance in changes of fresh clothes, our warm baths and beds. As Howard Clark points out, if the Cyclops could be made the next section of her barracks, the Phaeacians are over-civilized. They hardly seem to be part of the same age or world as the heroes of the Trojan War. There is no challenge, no difficulty, all is ease and feasting and warm, soft beds. For Odysseus to remain here would be, as much as accepting the offer of Calypso, a rejection of his heroic standing. The transitional character of the island is symbolized by the strange olive tree under which Odysseus sleeps. He set out for the woods and not far from the water found a grove with a clearing all around, and crawled beneath two bushy olives sprung from the same root, one olive wild, the other well-bred stock. No such gusty wind could ever pierce them, nor could the sun's sharp rays invade their depths, nor could a downpour drench them through and through, so dense they grew together, snakily side by side. As Michael Nagler has pointed out, trees, especially olive trees, are important in the imagery of the Odyssey. The mast of Odysseus' ship is made of a pine tree, and significantly called a histos, the same word as loom. Grasping a mast saves Odysseus from being swallowed by Charybdis, and the olive tree bed that stands at the center of Odysseus' house symbolizes his marriage and kingdom. Foreshadowing his return to his olive tree bed, Odysseus finds refuge and sleeps under an olive tree. The Phaeacian olive tree is half wild, half cultivated. To see the full significance of this, we should note that Odysseus' adventures in no man's land are equally adventures in an uncultivated, uncivilized region of the world. Pierre Vidal-Naquet explained that for Hesiod and Homer, agriculture, sacrifice, prohibition of incest, and cooking food are primary signs of civilized life. Throughout his adventures, Odysseus uses these to gauge the peoples he encounters. His repeated hopes to find bread eaters are usually disappointed. From this angle, he is not so much traveling through Neverland as he is visiting a series of barbaric tribes, something like a modern anthropologist. When he lands at Phaeacia, he finds himself under a tree that is half cultivated and half wild. He may not be home, where he will delight in the fields of grain, but at least he is not on the island of the Cyclops anymore either. Phaeacia stands on the border between the uncultivated and the cultivated. If Skiria is like Ogygia, then the former is no place for a hero. As Odysseus enters the palace of Antinous, he passes walls of bronze crowned with blue blades that are set with golden doors set on silver doorposts. Guarding the doorways are dogs of gold and silver, forged by the god of fire with all his cunning craft, and in the hall golden boys. Guarding the doorways are dogs of gold and silver, forged by the god of fire with all his cunning craft, and in the hall golden boys hold torches to light the feast. Surrounding the palace are an orchard and gardens that are as luxurious as those around Calypso's cave. Like Hermes gazing at the wonders of Calypso's cave, Odysseus stands before the palace, gazing at all this bounty, marveling at it all. Like Ogygia, Scheria tempts Odysseus with promises of a long, languid, but ultimately inglorious life. At Scheria, too, Odysseus is Calypso.
Nausicaa, princess of the Phaeacians, is among the temptations that Scheria presents. Allusions to marriage abound in these books. Athena appears to Nausicaa in a dream and urges her to go to the beach to wash her clothes in preparation for her wedding. Nausicaa is of marriageable age, as both Athena and later Odysseus notice, and she drops hints that Odysseus might be a suitable husband. When he has cleaned and anointed himself and Athena has lavish splendor over his head and shoulders, Nausicaa comments to her girlfriends, "Ah, if only a man like that were called my husband." Later, as she gives him instructions for entering the city without causing a stir, she imagines that the townspeople would speculate. Now who's that tall, handsome stranger Nausicaa has in tow? Where'd she light on him? Her husband-to-be? Just wait. King Antinous chases away his son, Laodamas, to make a place for Odysseus in a burnished chair. Clearly, Antinous hopes that Odysseus will permanently occupy the seat of sonship. Odysseus is seen entering several cities in the Odyssey. First, Helen tells the story of his disguised entry to Troy. In Book 7, he enters the city of the Phaeacians, where the story of his entry into Troy is sung. And in later books, he arrives at Ithaca and enters his own house. In every case, he comes in disguise, the man of twists and turns. The Phaeacians cannot help but recognize his nobility, apparent from his bearing when he first appears in the court. His conduct also marks him out as a hero. When challenged to enter the games, his anger flares and he protests that he is no stranger to sports. "I've held my place in the front ranks, I tell you." To prove the point, he throws a discus farther than any competitor and then taunts the Phaeacians. "Now go match that, you young pups." In the course of the taunt, he reveals that he is a veteran of the Trojan War.
"I'll take on all contenders gladly, test them head to head. I'm no disgrace in the world of games where men compete. Well, I know how to handle a fine polished bow. The first to hit my man in a mass of enemies, even with rows of comrades pressing near me, taking aim with our shafts to hit our target. Philocletus alone outshot me there at Troy." Though the Phaeacians know that they are in the presence of a hero, they do not know who he is. This is a pattern of delayed identification we have seen at work in various ways already. His identity, however, is revealed by a song. This is appropriate, since heroes live eternally in the songs of the bards. Following dinner, Antinous calls the bard to sing. Among his songs is one about the affair of Ares and Aphrodite, the god of war and the goddess of love. Aphrodite is married to the lame god of fire, Hephaestus, but lusts after Ares. They arrange to meet at Aphrodite's bed when they believe that Hephaestus will be gone. Hephaestus, however, has been warned of Aphrodite's betrayal, so he makes a web of chains that will drop on the lovers and hold them fast when they come to the bed. Unsuspecting, Ares and Aphrodite begin making love, and the charmed chains fall and catch them like flies in a spider web, while all the gods gather to taunt and laugh at the couple. Like many mythological stories, this is a revealing episode. It shows that the gods of the Greeks were neither noble nor moral in a Christian sense. Both Ares and Aphrodite were lustful and guilty of adultery, and the other gods, far from condemning, find delight in their predicament. In the Odyssey, however, this song strikingly parallels the situation of Odysseus, and of course of Agamemnon. Like Ares, the suitors lust after Penelope. Like Hephaestus, Odysseus wishes to prevent his wife from being taken from him. We know, though Odysseus does not, that Penelope, unlike Aphrodite, has remained faithful to her lamed, scarred, suffering husband. More than that, the song ends with Hephaestus triumphing. "Look how limping Hephaestus conquers war, the quickest of all the gods who rule Olympus," says one of the gods enjoying the spectacle. "The cripple wins by craft," says another. These are the heartening words for Odysseus, the man of craft and guile, for he hopes to catch the suitors in a web. At Odysseus' request, Demodocus, the poet, also sings a song of the Trojan horse. Odysseus' own finest hour, how Odysseus marched right up to Deiphobus' house like the god of war on attack, with die-hard Menelaus, and fought the grimmest fight he had ever braved, but he won through at last thanks to Athena's superhuman power. Hearing the song, Odysseus weeps. Antinous calls a halt to the singing and asks Odysseus point blank to identify himself. The song and his reaction to it confirms that he is a hero of Troy. At the end of the epic, Odysseus will be revealed in rage and slaughter. In the luxurious palace of Antinous and the flickering lights of the evening feast, things are different. The son of Pain, whom we first saw weeping on the shores of Calypso's island, weeps again as he begins to recount his journey. Song and tears unveil the suffering hero.
Heroes of the City of Man, pages 191 to 197. Here we go. His own did not receive him, books 13 through 18. The second half of the epic is largely a series of recognition scenes. A recognition scene is one of several type scenes frequently used in literature. These frequently involve the reunion of people who have long been separated and include standard recurring elements. One of the parties expresses a wish for the other to appear, and lo and behold, there he is. Tokens or signs that prove one's identity are also conventional. In Aeschylus's Liberation Bearers, Orestes and Electra recognize each other by the similarity of their footprints, a scene mocked in Aristophanes' play The Frogs. Recognition of Odysseus does not come easily. Not only has he been gone for a long time, but he returns in disguise and gradually reveals himself to those who have remained loyal. First, he reveals himself to Telemachus, and together the now mature young man and his father make plans to dispose of the suitors. Then he is revealed to his old nursemaid, Eurycleia. He reveals himself to a few loyal household servants. When the moment is right, he reveals himself in all his splendor and strength to the terrified suitors. He is reunited to Penelope, and finally to his mourning father, Laertes. Odysseus, who began the epic hidden on Calypso's island, achieves a progressive apocalypse. Wendell Berry has pointed out that Odysseus's journey from no man's land to home is a movement toward the center of order. The structure may be graphed as a series of diminishing circles centered on one of the posts of the marriage bed. Odysseus makes his way from the periphery toward that center. All around the structure verges on the sea, which is a wilderness ruled by the forces of nature and by the gods. In spite of the excellence of his ship and crew and his skill in navigation, a man is alien there. Only when he steps ashore does he enter a human world. From the shoreline of his island of Ithaca, Odysseus makes his way across a succession of boundaries, enclosed and enclosing. He comes to his island, to his own lands, to his town, to his household and house, to his bedroom, to his bed. By these, his homecoming becomes at the same time a restoration of order. Here we see that the man of twists and turns alone can navigate the treacherous voyage to the center, the place around which the world revolves. Only this kind of hero can establish a properly ordered society. At each stage, Odysseus must show himself by some token or sign. There are obvious reasons for this. He must have some proof beyond his own word that he is indeed the king of Ithaca. This is especially necessary since so many suitors have presented themselves as potential successors to Odysseus. How is one to know if this man is just a cleverly disguised suitor? Penelope is afraid that a god might be deceiving her by taking the form of her husband. More subtly, the need for signs fits with several of the larger themes of the epic. Odysseus is, as we have seen, the man of twists and turns, and other characters also use various kinds of ruses and deceptions. This kind of world makes people wary and suspicious, and absolute proof is needed if one is to win trust. This also relates to the themes of identity, name, and heroism that we have been examining. Book 13 opens with Odysseus' return to the real world. Scheria was only a midpoint in this return, a borderland between fantasy and reality, between waking and sleeping. Fittingly, the whole Phaeacian sojourn is framed by scenes of Odysseus sleeping. He falls asleep under the olive tree on the shores of Scheria, and the Phaeacians leave him sleeping on the shore of Ithaca. When he wakes, the dream world is finally behind him. He is ready to return to reality. The differences between Odysseus' two arrivals are important. When Odysseus struggled ashore at Scheria, he was naked and penniless, having barely escaped death at sea. Arriving in Ithaca, he is clothed and bears the riches that the Phaeacians have given him. He is no longer nobody, stripped of glory. He has begun his ascent. This return to glory is also a return to humanity. When he arrived at Scheria, he stalked out to meet Nausicaa like a mountain lion charging a flock. But as he makes way toward Ithaca, he is, as a man aching for his evening meal when all day long his brace of wine-dark oxen have dragged and bolted plowshare down a fallow field. True to character, Odysseus is clothed not only in Phaeacian garments, but in a fictitious identity. The first person he meets on the misty shore of Ithaca is Athena, and when she tells him he is in Ithaca, he tells an elaborate lie about who he is. I'm a fugitive now, you see. I killed Idomeneus' son. Orsilochus, lightning on his legs, a man who beat all runners alive on that long island. What a racer! He tried to rob me of all the spoil I won at Troy, the plunder I went to hell and back to capture true, cleaving my way through wars of men and waves of sea. Odysseus tells other stories to the swineherd Eumaeus and to Penelope. The reasons for the deception are clear. He has returned to his kingdom and cannot guess at first who will be loyal and who is out to kill him. Unlike the gullible Agamemnon, he is a man of twists and turns and realizes he must distrust everyone. Suspicion and deception come naturally to Odysseus, as Athena observes. Any man, any god who met you would have to be some champion lying cheat to get past you. Yet the lie contains grains of truth for those with ears to hear. He reveals that he was at Troy, and he will exploit this part of his story throughout the following books. This gives him a basis for saying he knows Odysseus, and that he has news of his imminent return. He also says that he has been to hell and back to recover his plunder, which is quite literally true. Interestingly, he says he is a fugitive seeking asylum, and in Book 15, Telemachus will welcome a real fugitive to the shores of Ithaca, and before meeting the other fugitive, his father. A story is not sufficient cover on Ithaca, however. He needs to have more elaborate clothing to hide his identity. Athena provides us by transforming him into a beggar. I will shrivel the supple skin on your lithe limbs, strip the russet curls from your head, and deck you out in rags you'd hate to see some other mortal wear. I'll dim the fire in your eyes, so shining once, until you seem appalling to all these suitors, even your wife and your son you left behind at home. In this disguise, Odysseus will appear in the palace as a supplicant, seeking hospitality. Thus, the disguise picks up on the constant issue of the treatment of strangers. Moreover, Athena makes him look so lowly that the suitors will treat him with contempt, and this will heighten their guilt and justify the merciless slaughter that Odysseus inflicts on them. In many ways, the story of Odysseus' return to Ithaca reflects themes of the gospel story. The king comes in disguise to his own kingdom to reclaim his throne and is mistreated by the nobles of the kingdom. He suffers their mockery and persecution silently, but then reveals himself in power and glory in a day of resurrection. Even Odysseus' vengeance against the suitors who have been preying on his bride find a parallel in Jesus coming to Jerusalem to destroy the harlot that drinks the blood of his bride. Still, the two stories diverge subtly. In the Gospels, Jesus submits not only to mockery and rejection, but even to death, and in his death he achieves his victory. Odysseus, operating by the Greek heroic ethic, suffers silently for a time, but only until he has an opening to take savage vengeance against his persecutors. True, Jesus eventually carries out vengeance against his enemies, but on the cross he prays for their forgiveness. Forgive them, for they know not what they do, is not part of Odysseus' vocabulary. The cross is not a weapon in his arsenal. For Odysseus, then, the movement of the last half of the epic is a progress from beggar to king, from humiliation to exaltation. This is not only a personal ascent for Odysseus, but affects a reordering of Ithacan society. In a properly ordered society, the king is at the top, and the beggars, though they are to be treated with kindness, are at the bottom. In Ithaca, beggars, suitors have the run of the palace, while the true king is treated like a beggar. When Odysseus moves from beggar to king, he is also turning the topsy-turvy world of Ithaca right side up. Swine rule Ithaca, Odysseus comes as a beastmaster, and Adam, who establishes human dominion. Following Athena's instructions, Odysseus first makes his way to the hut of the swineherd Eumaeus. The fact that a swineherd appears in the epic at all shows how far we are from the Iliad, where nearly every character is an aristocrat and a warrior. And Homer takes the time to make Eumaeus a real and thoroughly sympathetic character. His loyalty to Odysseus is shown in the care he has taken to protect and care for the swine. His first words are of his long-lost master. "Here I sit, my heart aching, broken for him, my master, my great king, fattening up his own hogs for other men to eat, while he, starving for food, I wager, wanders the earth, a beggar adrift in strangers' cities, foreign-speaking lands, if he's still alive, that is, still sees the rising sun." His words are oddly both true and false. His master is a beggar in a land where strangers have been feasting on his wealth, even though he is king and at home. In an epic where treatment of strangers is a test of good and bad character, Eumaeus shows himself to be a good man by inviting Odysseus to eat your fill of bread and wine. His offer is rooted in his piety. When he slaughters a pig for Odysseus to share, he did not forget the gods, but plucked some tufts from the pig's head to place in the fire as a token offering, along with a prayer for Odysseus's return. At the end of Book 14, Eumaeus passes a further test of loyalty. The beggar tells a story about how Odysseus once provided him with a cloak to sleep in, implying that Eumaeus should imitate his master's generosity. Eumaeus immediately answers, "You won't want for clothes or whatever else is due a worn-out traveler." Eumaeus will do his part in reclothing the king who had been stripped naked. He is no Cyclops from his modest possessions. He offers a guest gift. Eumaeus' behavior not only reveals something about this loyal servant, but also provides a commentary on the situation at the palace. On one hand, Odysseus' arrival at the swineherd's hut casts light backward on his previous adventures. While the Phaeacian palace was surrounded by a bronze wall and guarded by golden dogs, the swineherd's hut is surrounded by a wall of his own building and real, vicious guard dogs. Odysseus has come from Never Never Land back into the mundane but familiar world of Ithaca. Yet, though his adventures in Fantasyland are over, one of his most challenging tests awaits him on his own soil. As we have seen, his adventures in No Man's Land have toughened him and taught him the virtue of patience, the necessity of delayed identification. On the other hand, Eumaeus may be contrasted to the suitors. Though the palace may be more richly endowed and the suitors more noble of birth, the swineherd is more civilized, and his hut more welcoming. Finally, the swineherd's reception assures Odysseus that at least some Ithacans have not forgotten him and have kept their lamps lit in anticipation of the bridegroom's return. The master has returned and finds them so doing. Homer has gotten his hero back home, and this winds up the travel phase of Odysseus' story, covering books 5 through 14. Books 1 through 4 show us the education of Telemachus in the ways of heroic society, raising up the son to be a suitable companion to his famous father. But Book 4 ended with the son's fate still hanging in the balance. The suitors boarded now and sailed the sea lanes, plotting in their hearts Telemachus' plunge to death. Before Homer could move forward to the climax of the story, he had to bring Telemachus back into the picture. The parallel between father and son is underscored by the structure of Book 15, which begins with Telemachus' departure from Sparta, switches to the swineherd's hut where Odysseus and Eumaeus trade stories late into the night, and then ends by switching back to Telemachus' arrival at Ithaca. Like father, like son, Telemachus must go, if not to hell and back, at least from a deadly threat to assured life. All the way home from Sparta and Pylos, he wonders, would he sweep clear of death or be cut down? Telemachus must be able to overcome another obstacle as well. Like his father on Calypso's island and on Scheria, Telemachus must resist the temptation to bask in the comforts of Sparta and Pylos while he is needed at home. When he accompanies Pisistratus back to Pylos, he shows he has learned this lesson. He refuses to go all the way to Nestor's house because he fears that Nestor, like a well-meaning lotus eater, will smother him with hospitality. Your father's old, he tells Pisistratus, In love with his hospitality, I fear he'll hold me, chafing in his palace. I must hurry home. Both father and son must leave no man's land behind to return to the field of battle and glory. Telemachus, like Odysseus, has been instructed to go to Emmaus's hut, and the swineherd embraces him as a father brimming with love and welcomes home his darling only son in a warm embrace. Home now in the 10th year from far abroad. This is an example of a reverse simile, a comparison that describes a scene in terms that are directly opposite of what is actually taking place. Telemachus has not been away 10 years, and Emmaus is not his father. Yet their reunion is compared to the return of a long-lost son. In this case, the simile prepares a way for what happens next. When the swineherd leaves to take a message to Penelope, Odysseus reveals himself to Telemachus, the long-lost father, not the son, has returned. And Telemachus does not immediately welcome his father with a warm embrace. "No, you're not Odysseus, not my father." It is only after Odysseus explains that Athena's power has transformed him to an old beggar that Telemachus, reacting as Penelope later will, threw his arms around his great father, sobbing uncontrollably as a deep desire for tears welled up in both. The first revelation of the king is complete. As in the hall of the Phaeacian, so here in the hut of the swineherd. Tears mark the son of pain. Emmaus may sleep with pigs, but the real swine are in the palace. By contrast with the tears and embraces of the swineherd's hut, Odysseus' reception at his house is not unlike his reception by Polyphemus. In both cases, he takes on the guise of a nobody, an Aotes, though this is just one trick from the master of Metis. As with the Cyclops, too, the suitors show no hospitality. The goatherd Melanthius meets Odysseus and Emmaus on the way to the palace with harsh words. "Wretched pig boy, where do you take your filthy swine, the sickening beggar who licks the pots at feasts?" Twice suitors throw stools at Odysseus. Even Melantho, one of the serving women, treats him with contempt. "Get out, you tramp, be glad of the good you've got, or we'll sling a torch at you, rout you out at once." Antinous, the leader of the suitors, lashes out at Emmaus. "Your Highness, swineherd, why drag this to town? Haven't we got our share of vagabonds to deal with, disgusting beggars who lick the feasters' plates?" Though he seems to be referring to the real beggars who come to Ithaca for food. Antinous' questions are rich with unintended irony. The palace is indeed full of beggars who lick feasters' plates. The suitors themselves, who are begging food from Odysseus' house. When Antinous says he wants to get rid of the beggar, he is pronouncing his own doom. The connection between the suitors and beggars helps us to understand the boxing match that Odysseus engages in with Arneus, a real beggar, who tries to protect his turf against Odysseus. Odysseus beats him easily and throws him out the door with the words, "No more lording it over strangers, no more playing the beggar king for you." The suitors find enormous comedy in the battle of the beggars, but they are laughing to their own hurt. Only a short time before, Odysseus told Antinous that he looked like a king. Like all the suitors, he is lording it over strangers and playing the beggar king, and his fate will be much worse than that of Arneus. Homer's description of Arneus' wound reminds us of the deaths in the Iliad. Suddenly red blood came spurting out of his mouth, and headlong down he pitched in the dust, howling, teeth locked in a grin, feet beating the ground. Heroes of the City of Man. Pages 200 to 204. Apocalypse, books 20 to 24. The suitors clearly have no clue who this beggar is, and in their ignorance they are less than dogs, for even Argos, Odysseus' dog, recognizes his master upon his return. But does Penelope? It is clear that she values his conversation and advice, since most of Book 19 describes their nighttime conversation. Penelope, finally finding a sympathetic man who has had some contact with her husband, pours out her heart. She tells Odysseus about the trick of the shroud, by which she kept the suitors at bay for 3 years. Odysseus' affection and pity is genuine. Odysseus' heart went out to his grief-stricken wife, and he renews her hope by assuring her that Odysseus is still alive, laden with treasure. Echoing Theoclymenus' prophecy, he swears that Odysseus will return to Ithaca within the month. Does Penelope suspect who he is? The text does not say for sure, but some commentators believe she does. As we noted above, Helen, who knew Odysseus much less well than Penelope, recognized him when he infiltrated Troy disguised as a beggar. In a strange way, the lies that Odysseus tells are themselves marks of his identity. Penelope, who is herself a master of craft and cunning, might well have recognized her man of twists and turns in the elaborate stories he tells. More importantly, Penelope's actions in the subsequent books perhaps suggest that she recognizes him. At the beginning of Book 21, she sets up a contest to determine which suitor she will marry. He must be able to string Odysseus's bow and shoot an arrow through 12 axes. As in many folk tales, the bride sets up a contest to decide who her husband will be. The contest is supposed to lead to a wedding day. Odysseus is there to make sure it is a blood wedding, crushing the vipers who have tried to seduce his bride. This is a change from her earlier promise to accept the wealthiest suitor and changes the terms of their courting. As Bernard Knox observes, Penelope might be credited with great foresight here. She suspects that none of the suitors who have spent their youth in games and feasting will be able to meet her challenge, and they will slink away in shame. She is determined she will not accept a weaker man. What she wants is another Odysseus, and that is what she gets, an Odysseus who has been to hell and back. Yet hers is a puzzling decision. Why does she go ahead with this now? Odysseus, in disguise, has assured her that her husband is alive and coming home soon, and the prophet Theoclymenus has said that Odysseus is already in Ithaca. Perhaps she recognizes her husband, and without speaking a word about it, they are colluding in the destruction of the suitors. Interesting as this possibility is, Homer does not explicitly indicate that Penelope recognizes Odysseus, and much of the evidence is against it. During the nighttime conversation between Penelope and the beggar, for example, Homer teases us with the conventions of the recognition scene. Penelope expresses her wish that Odysseus would return. Whatever form and feature I had, what praise I'd won, the deathless gods destroyed the day the Achaeans sailed away to Troy, my husband, in their ships. Odysseus, if he could return to tend my life, the renown I had would only grow in glory. The beggar assures her that Odysseus is on his way and provides convincing evidence that he has seen Odysseus. In a conventional story, this kind of exchange normally leads to a great unveiling. "And here I am, Odysseus, returned to save you," said in an artificially deep voice. True to form, however, Odysseus further delays speaking his name, and there is no glimmer of recognition in Penelope. Instead, the scene ends with our expectations of a reunion unfulfilled. The delay is dramatically brilliant, bringing us to the peak of excitement and then easing off. But Homer's artistry takes a surprising further step. Odysseus goes from his conversation with Penelope to take a bath, and during the bath he is recognized. Not by Penelope, but by Euryclea. Why then does Penelope decide to choose one of the suitors? To understand this, we have to recognize that Homer's depiction of Penelope's feelings about her situation is more subtle and realistic than it might appear to be. No doubt she is longing for her husband's return. She prays for death partly because it would be better to be with Odysseus under the earth than to continue above ground without him. Yet the dream that she tells Odysseus betrays ambiance toward the suitors. "I keep 20 geese in the house. From the water trough they come and peck their wheat. I love to watch them all, but down from a mountain swooped this great hook-beaked eagle. Yes, and he snapped their necks and killed them, one and all, and they lay in heaps throughout the hall, while he, back to the clear blue sky, soared at once. But I wept and wailed, only a dream, of course. But down he swooped again and settled on a jutting rafter, called out in a human voice that dried my tears. 'Courage, daughter of famous Icarius! This is no dream, but a happy waking vision. Real as day that will come true for you. The geese were your suitors. I was once the eagle, but now I am your husband, back again at last, about to launch a terrible fate against them all.'" Odysseus is right in his interpretation. Destruction is clear for each and every suitor. Not a soul escapes his death and doom. What is intriguing is Penelope's reaction to the fate of her geese. She loves to watch them all, and when the eagle slaughters them, she weeps uncontrollably. In Odysseus's absence, at least the suitors provide a pleasing diversion. They may be eating Telemachus out of his inheritance, but Penelope apparently enjoys watching them eat. Just as Odysseus's suffering in exile is eased by his pleasure with Calypso and Circe, so Penelope's journey is not without its joys. Another important passage occurs after Penelope and Odysseus have been reunited. She, dissolved in tears, rushed to Odysseus, flung her arms around his neck, and kissed his head and cried out, "Odysseus, don't flare up at me now! Not you, always the most understanding man alive! The gods, it was the gods who sent us sorrow. They grudged us both a life in each other's arms. From the heady zest of youth to the stoop of old age, remember Helen of Argos, Zeus' daughter? Would she have sported so in a stranger's bed if she had dreamed that Achaea's sons were doomed to fight and die to bring her home again? Some god spurred her to do her shameless work." Penelope explicitly compares her situation to Helen's. Just as the gods spurred Helen to her adultery with Paris, so the gods have kept Penelope and Odysseus separate these many years. Implicitly, Penelope is suggesting that she has come close to becoming another Helen. Separated from her husband by the will of the gods, she nearly chose to bed down with another unscrupulous guest, another Paris. Her decision to use a contest of the axes to choose a husband was sincere. She had given up hope that Odysseus would return, and she was ready to settle for another. The final books of the Odyssey do not tell the story of two clever people working together to foil their common enemies, but the fairy tale story of the heroic lover coming in the nick of time to rescue the bride from the dragon. The suitors, not used to war or weaponry, are unable to string the bow, much less shoot the arrow through the axes. Odysseus, still disguised as a beggar, asks for a chance. Antinous dismisses him. "The wine has overpowered you, heady wine." His warning that there will be no end of trouble if you should string that bow is truer than he can know, as is his story about the centaur who, drunk with wine, wreaked havoc in the house of Pirithous. Trouble there will be, and Antinous will be the first to feel it. Penelope and Telemachus overrule Antinous to let Odysseus have a try. Penelope even promises him a shirt and cloak in handsome clothes if he can string the bow. Should he prove himself another Odysseus, the beggar will change his rags for garments of glory. Telemachus dismisses Penelope from the room while Odysseus examines the bow. Then, like an expert singer skilled at lyre and song, who strains a string to a new peg with ease, making the plaint sheep gut fast at either end, so with his virtuoso ease Odysseus strung his mighty bow. Quickly his right hand plucked the string to test its pitch, and under his touch it sang out clear and sharp as a swallow's cry. Heroes of the City of Man, pages 205 to 210. Odysseus has already acted as a bard when he has entertained the Phaeacians with the tales of his adventures. By stringing the bow and carrying out his vengeance against the suitors, Odysseus is ensuring that his praises will be sung by poets for ages after. Homer also implies that Odysseus' skill with the bow is a kind of art. Odysseus' bow sings like the sirens. Both leave the field piled with corpses. The suitors are celebrating a feast to Apollo, the god of the bow, and they are destined to get their fill of Apollo on this day. Moreover, the fact that the slaughter takes place at a feast picks up on the themes of food and violated hospitality that have been so prominent throughout the poem. Suitors who slaughtered Odysseus' bulls and goats in Odysseus' house are themselves slaughtered there. The white bones of the men who bled Odysseus white will be scattered in the same hall. Homer brings out the connection of the slaughter and the feast by his description of the death of Antinous, the chief of the suitors who is Odysseus' first victim. Odysseus aimed and shot Antinous square in the throat, and the point went stabbing clean through the soft neck and out. And off to the side he pitched, the cup dropped from his grasp as a shaft sank home, and the man's lifeblood came spurting out his nostrils, thick red jets. A sudden thrust of his foot, he kicked away the table. Food showered across the floor. the bread and meat soaked in a swirl of bloody filth. This description also reminds us of Agamemnon's description of his own death at the hands of Aegisthus, though here the tables are turned, and the returning hero slaughters those who preyed on his bride. That arrow through the neck, that reminds us of many death scenes in the Iliad. Odysseus is a different man from Achilles, but once he has a clean opening, he strikes as mercilessly as Achilles ever did. When Leodes protests that he only served as prophet to the suitors, the wrath of Odysseus is unfazed. Only a priest, a prophet for this mob, you say? How hard you must have prayed in my own house that the heady day of my return would never dawn. And with that, Odysseus hacked the prophet square across the neck, and the praying head went tumbling in the dust, returning to the dust from which it came. Fortunately, level-headed Telemachus is there to hold his father off. Phemius grasps Odysseus's knees and asks for mercy. And Telemachus quickly says, "Stop! Don't cut him down. This one's innocent. So is the herald Medon." When the slaughter is done, Odysseus scans the house to find, one and all in blood and dust, great hauls of them down and out like fish that fishermen drag from the churning gray surf in looped and coiling nets. Odysseus, who has mastered the sea, masters the surging ocean of suitors, while Agamemnon was caught in a net spun by Aegisthus. Odysseus is more like Hephaestus, who netted Eris by his Metis. Not only are the suitors slaughtered, but the serving women allied with them are hacked with swords. This may seem unnecessarily harsh, but it makes sense both in terms of plot and theme. Even more than the suitors, who were not personal servants of Odysseus' house, these women have betrayed him and his queen. Faithfulness in women is a prominent concern in the epic. Clytemnestra, the wife of Agamemnon, was slaughtered by Orestes, her own son, and though Penelope remains faithful to her husband, faithless women meet Clytemnestra's fate. Odysseus is strangely slow to celebrate his catch. He checks Euryclea when she is about to cry out in victory. "Rejoice in your heart, old woman. Peace. No cries of triumph now. It's unholy to glory over the bodies of the dead." Perhaps this is a lesson Odysseus learned on the island of the Cyclops. Odysseus's unwillingness to broadcast his victory is also seen in the instructions he gives to Telemachus. First, go and wash, and pull fresh tunics on, and tell the maids in the hall to dress well too, and let the inspired bard take up his ringing lyre, and lead off for us all a dance so full of heart, that whoever hears the strains outside the gates, a passer-by on the road, a neighbor round about, will think it's a wedding feast that's underway. Even Polyphemus had inquisitive neighbors, so Odysseus is taking no chances that the suitors' cries for help will arouse suspicion. Then, too, it is appropriate that the feast of slaughter that ended the improper feasting of the suitors should yield to a dance and a wedding celebration. For there is, in fact, a wedding underway, as Odysseus and Penelope renew their marriage. The disguised king has revealed himself to his swineherd, to his son, to his nursemaid, but he has come home chiefly to rescue and be reunited with his bride. Book 23 winds up this loose thread with the scene between Penelope and Odysseus. At first, she, like her son, is cautious, uncertain if this beggar really is her husband. A long while she sat in silence, numbing wonder, filled her heart as her eyes explored his face. One moment he seemed Odysseus to the life. The next, no, he was not the man she knew. A huddled mass of rags was all she saw. Telemachus is impatient, but Odysseus is willing to be tested by Penelope's secret signs. Penelope tells Euryclea to move the sturdy bedstead out of our bridal chamber, and Odysseus, for the first time in the story, is tricked, for he knows the bed cannot be moved. This is all the proof Penelope needs. The secret sign of our bed, which no one's ever seen but you and I, and a single handmaid, Arcturus, the servant my father gave me when I came, who kept the doors of our room you built so well. Just as Odysseus passes the test of the bed, Penelope proves herself to him, for she reveals that However strong the temptation to become a Helen, had any other man seen her bed, she could not have used this as a test. Through the test of the bed, Penelope has unveiled the hero. He is no longer a beggar, a nobody, but husband, King Odysseus. The construction of the bed is not only significant as a secret shared only by Odysseus and Penelope, but because it symbolizes the permanence of their marriage. As Odysseus describes it, there is a branching olive tree inside our court, which he cut and shaped to make my bedpost. Their bed, like their marriage, is stable and enduring. Olive trees produce one of the main foods of ancient Greece, and thus symbolize fertility, life, and plenty, a fitting sign of their marriage. Living in a palace built around a living olive tree, Odysseus unites nature and culture in one fertile unity. The bed thus symbolizes the work of Odysseus as king. No longer a warrior, the sacker of cities, he is revealed as a restorer of order, as a builder who shapes nature to secure the pleasure, fertility, and future of Ithaca. Branches and poles and trees have been means of Odysseus' salvation. He was saved from shipwreck by grasping one of the timbers of his raft, slept under an olive tree when he landed at Scheria, shielded himself with an olive branch when he approached Nausicaa, and tied himself to a mast to keep from going after the sirens. These various transformations of the saving tree come to a climax in the bed test, which marks out his homecoming, his final redemption from his trials. As Book 24 opens, we are again in the underworld as the suitors arrive and report of Odysseus' deeds. Agamemnon is again recounting his ignoble death at the hands of Aegisthus and Clytemnestra, assuring Achilles that he had died in a more heroic way, when suddenly a group of suitors arrives. It seems they can think of nothing but Penelope's shroud. Aphemedon tells of how Penelope deceived them for 3 years by promising to marry when the shroud was done. But the shroud, it turns out, was not for Laertes, but for them. She finished it off against her will. We forced her. But just as she bound off that great shroud and washed it, spread it out, glistening like the sunlight or the moon, just then some wicked spirit brought Odysseus back, from God knows where, to the edge of his estate, where the swineherd keeps his pig, and back to the same place came Odysseus' own dear son. The pair of them schemed our doom, our death trap. Agamemnon recognizes the scene and rejoices in the faithfulness of Penelope. Because Odysseus had a faithful bride, he, not the suitors, set the death trap. Through her faithfulness, Penelope wove a doom for the suitors and ensured that Odysseus' homecoming would not, like Agamemnon's, end in tragedy. Book 23 brings a hero back to his bride, but the hero is not only a husband, but a king. And his return is not only to restore love, but also order and justice. Odysseus sees a danger immediately, telling Telemachus, "When someone kills a lone man in the realm, who leaves behind him no great band of avengers, still the killer flees. Goodbye to kin and country. But we brought down the best of the island's princes, the pillars of Ithaca. Weigh it well, I urge you." Bringing down the pillars of Ithaca is a risky business, not least because the pillars have relatives. Eupeithes organizes the suitors' families to attack Odysseus, but just as they are about to join battle, Athena calls a halt. "Let peace and wealth come cresting through the land." Like the Iliad, the Odyssey ends with a reprieve from conflict, but the comic ending feels much more complete in the latter epic. The Iliad ends with a funeral feast that we know will be followed by renewed battle. In the Odyssey, peace is the final word. Odysseus' return, like Achilles, brings resolution. In the hero's absence, the kingdom descended into chaos, while wealth was being wrongly consumed and destroyed. With the hero's return and the intervention of the goddess, order is restored and things are put back in their proper place. With the hero's return, the disordered feast of the suitors is purged in a feast of battle, and the house becomes what it should be, the site for a continuing feast of bread, wine, and flesh.